It's Rule 10. Don't get personally involved in any case.
You got it.
Rule 9, never leave home without a knife.
And never bring a knife to a gunfight.
Would you please turn off your cell phones? The old script was turn off your cell phones and pagers as they interfere with the taping mechanism, for those who remember tapes. The meeting of the Board of Adjustment for the Borough of Somerville for today will please come to order. Adequate notice of this meeting as required by the Open Public Meeting Act that has been that on January 17th, 2025, a copy of the notice specifying the date, time, and location was posted on the bulletin board outside of Borough Hall, given to the clerk administrator, mailed, faxed, or emailed to the Courier News, and posted on the borough website. If any member of this body believes that this meeting is being held in violation of the Open Public Meeting Act, please state your views at this time. Hearing none, these proceedings are of a judicial nature. Only those items on the agenda will be addressed. Proper judicial decorum will and must be maintained. Next item, roll call, please.
Chairman Adair,
Here.
Ed Allett,
Here.
Roberta Karpenitz, Morgan McLaughlin, Rich O'Neill,
Here.
Brian Vidimski,
Here.
John Flores,
Here.
Eric Alvarez.
Would someone please move that Eric's absence be recorded as excused? Second. Sue, moved and second, all in favor?
Aye.
Carried. I'm sorry.
Stuart Daniels,
Here.
We have a quorum. Do we have any conflicts? Okay, let's roll. Next item, Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we have no minutes and no resolutions. Because of the nature of this particular application, I think it's going to take a long time. We will be taking a break around 8:30, but we do not hear new testimony after 10 o'clock. If we can't wrap it up by 10, we'll carry it over to the next meeting, because I believe that we have room on our agenda. Okay? Okay. Yes.
Before we start this hearing on the application, the only application tonight, I appreciate the 10 o'clock curfew. I was going to bring that up. Thank you. I think that we should have Cliff explain the basics of a D1 variance application just to the general public, because it's an unusual thing and most people are not familiar with it. They should know what the standards and proofs are.
Yeah, that's what we've been doing on our civics classes after the meeting, but yes. Cliff, could you explain it?
Sure. We could do it before tonight. No, a D1 a variance under D1, and what it is specifically is under the land use law, NJSA 40:55D-70, subsection small d, subparagraph 1. What a D1 variance is that it's called a use variance. What is a use variance? Essentially, what's a use variance? A use variance is essentially a proposed use which is contrary to the terms of the terms and conditions of the master plan and zoning ordinance. Now, in some cases, what that means is that it's expressly prohibited, or if in other instances, the ordinance may simply say anything that is not permitted is expressly prohibited. So that's how that works. From a policy standpoint, a D1 variance is for, to quote my beloved mentor, used to say, essentially it's basically a variance to permit development contrary to the law, contrary to the express zoning authority of the municipality. I've heard other experts say it's to make the illegal legal. It is essentially something that is considered at variance with the zoning policy of the municipality. Now, would you like me to go through the proofs, or We have one on the agenda tonight. I mean, it might be something where I would instruct you later, but
Just for the edification of the general public, can we sum it up in,
all right, in order to prove and, satisfy the burden of proof under a D variance, and just just preliminarily, it is well known and expressly known, has been set forth by our courts that, the burden of proof in a D1 variance, because of all the things that I just discussed, is extremely strict. It is essentially considered the most difficult burden of any variance because, as we've discussed, it's expressly contrary to the master plan and zoning ordinance. What has to be proven to satisfy the burden of proof, don't mean to be repetitive, for a D1 or a D1 use variance is that certain proofs have to be made. First of all, the first one is it's called the positive criteria. Now, what is the positive criteria? If you look at Section 2 of the Municipal Land Use Law, which sets forth all the purposes that the legislature had deemed appropriate for the municipal land, all the purposes of the MLUL, that is the applicant's burden there is to satisfy one or more purposes of that. And you can see there are numerous purposes set forth in section section D2 in section 4055 D2. You can always refer to it. An applicant is duty bound to advise the board either on its own or through a planner or an engineer or other professional that what purposes are being advanced and how they are being advanced. Merely saying that purpose A or purpose D or purpose whatever M is being purpose L is being advanced doesn't do it. You have to determine what is that purpose and how is the applicant satisfying it. And the board, of course, will make the determination as to if that is persuasive. So that's the positive criteria. The negative criteria is just as specific. The applicant has to show by clear evidence, and the burden is very basically it's by the preponderance. But I don't want to get into the preponderance of the evidence or the standards. What it is that the applicant has to show by substantial evidence that the variance requested can be granted without significant impairment of the municipal master plan and zoning ordinance. Now, what does that mean in English? Well, your master plan and zoning ordinance set forth the policies of your municipality. Can this variance be in a sense reconciled? And that reconciliation issue is extremely important. I can tell you that it's key in a lot of determinations made by a board. I can discuss it with you in greater detail. It certainly comes up all the time when D variances are litigated. And again, it's a very difficult burden of proof, and the applicant has to satisfy it by substantial evidence. If they do not, then the board certainly, and then I want to get to another point. I believe it's appropriate. Remember that in the end of the day, the board, just because you're told by an applicant it does this, you got to present proof. It's for the board fundamentally to weigh and adjudicate whether the proof is substantial and whether it is sufficient. And if the board is not sufficiently satisfied, then the variance, the board may exercise its right to deny the variance. One other thing you might want to note, there are instances where an applicant will apply for a use variances and a use variance, and concurrently apply for bulk variances for its application. What will, in some instances, the Supreme Court has discussed this. There are instances where those, if the board is going to make a determination as to the use variance, its determination as to the bulk variances can be subsumed into that determination. And we've done this as a board. Sometimes we approve a use variance and the applicant's attorney, it may even be Mr. Ogrodnik, I seem to recall at least one case when you did that, when you make the argument that you ask that the bulk variances, the non-use variances, be subsumed into the use variance for purposes of approval. So, ergo, what that means is that the application for the use variance might be approved, and the board can, accept the request of the applicant to consider the variance that way. Candidly, the board also has the authority to reject that and consider the variances in their the bulk or non-use variances in their individual capacities. But I just want to make sure the board understands what flexibility or authority it has. Okay, so in a nutshell, that's kind of a quick précis of what a D1 variance is. I presume that I won't get any argument from the applicant's attorney. I think what I've discussed is pretty well established in the law. So I'm not saying that my instruction is specific to your application. I've been asked to just
Give generalization.
deal with the issue itself. But sometimes I might do this not before this board, and I'll get a pitched battle, and I have to kind of sit down and explain to the attorney what the law says. I don't know that we have to do that here with experienced professionals involved. Are there any questions?
You talked about the granting the use and then looking at the bulk variances. Rich will remember this. Years ago, we had several situations, Mr. Ogrodnik probably does remember also, where our attorney, we ended up bifurcating the application,
Yes.
cutting the baby in half, dealing with the use, and then coming back and dealing with the bulk standards.
And the board has the authority to do that, or it can defer things in certain instances to site plan if that's a separate matter. I mean, the law is, the law provides the board, the board provides, the law provides the board with that authority. And I mean, it's important to understand that the board does have a fair amount of discretion in terms of, what it adjudicates. It also has the right to seek and obtain from any applicant, additional proofs if it believes those are appropriate. I mean, that's not an unreasonable request, because a reviewing judge making a determination that there wasn't sufficient evidence and that the board asked for it and it was denied it, this will often end up in a remand coming back to the board, which wastes a lot of time. So the burden, again, that's kind of a part and parcel burden of the applicant in satisfying its burden of proof.
Okay. One of the reasons that we're here, we almost didn't yesterday. We had several conversations, is that several people called Borough Hall asking if there was going to be a hearing tonight because they had not received written notification. Mr. Cole did a deep dive, and the applicant did send out the notice for the meeting on time. I think it was January 22nd they sent it out. And Mr. Cole did a dive in. He just randomly picked several of the notices, and he did a tracking with the United States Postal Service, and some of the mail was still held up in Kearney. But the applicant did notice in a timely manner. So that's why we're hearing it tonight.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
It's important that the audience know this. Under Section 12 of the Municipal Land Use Law, notice is completed by the applicant upon mailing. it's almost called the mailbox rule. If you bring your notices to the post office and present them, and, they're properly addressed and all those things, and in this situation, I know I did a kind of a deep dive myself. The law presumes that the notice is adequate. There may be instances where, because of the Postal Service's slowness or something like that, the notice may not reach the person. But remember too that doesn't mean if the person determines they have the information that they cannot come forward at the meeting. We always say to people, if that is the case, then you should simply present yourself at the meeting, which is what people have done.
Okay.
Art, one more thing.
Yes, Rich.
Sorry about that.
That's okay, all right.
We have, the borough of Somerville has now entered into agreement on affordable housing.
Yes.
And I'm not sure how that affects these applications, because I understand our body cannot negotiate affordable housing. It's got to be done by the mayor and council. And I don't know how we manipulate that, handle that, or how it works. This is first time out of the box for me on this type of thing.
Well, we have a meeting on that tomorrow at 4:15, and it's something that will be addressed. Right, Mike?
Yep. So how does that affect tonight's?
Yeah, that's my question.
Well, the ordinance has been adopted, and whatever the law says, they will be held accountable for.
Well, it's important also to remember that, existing state law and state rules in connection with affordable housing are still in effect. The fourth round becomes effective later this year. The third round, however old it may be, still controls and is still in effect. So, obviously under the supremacy clause of the Constitution, a state regulation supersedes a local rule. So whatever rules the state has adopted or enacted in connection with affordable housing are still applicable. So we're working subject to that framework.
So out of 38 units that they're going for, how many have to be affordable right now under?
Well, right now it's a 20% set aside, but we really don't. We don't have the application before us. Right, formally right now, you haven't entered your appearance. So I mean, I'm making a general comment and not a specific comment. If right now the set aside remains at 20%, will it go up? I do not. I mean, I know that there's all kinds of controversies involved about the numbers that have been assigned and what the general regulations are. I know that in my capacity as associate counsel to the League of Municipalities, there's a lot of effort being made to get clearer on this and maybe pause it a little bit. I don't think that will happen, but I do think that certainly clarification of what the law is and how it applies to Somerville or any other municipality will be resolved in fairly short order.
It's my understanding that some developers have already negotiated with the town on existing developments or proposed developments. I don't know how it worked or how it was done, but that's in effect right now. That's where I'm a little bit confused.
I know one contractor in town has already set aside 6 units.
Right, and then there's others are setting aside contributions, and there's a whole bunch of stuff swirling around us right now. We're sitting right in the middle of it.
Well, that can be done, but again, as you pointed out, that's really a matter for the administration, the mayor and council to determine.
Okay.
In terms of making any such arrangements. The board can certainly, if the board is concerned about this issue, it can certainly, address it. It can address it. It can impose certain, it can certainly we can discuss this with respect to any application. Remember, the board can always impose reasonable conditions if it believes those conditions advance the purposes of the MLUL and they're not essentially like a Nunziata situation, like you're trading a fire engine for an approval, or a Pond Run where you're trading a park across the street for an approval. I mean, you'll always hear from me if it seems like that's happening, because that's a great way to create trouble. So I hope that answers your question.
As we muddle our Irish way through this, we'll figure it out. But I don't want to be unfair to the town, the neighborhood, or the applicant. I just want to make sure we know what the game
Well,
is.
that's what we do.
Oh, no, as I said, that's why I'm going into the detail that I'm going into. And I'm in a unique position, I guess, because it's something I've worked on a fair amount. It seems, and I know it's a point of controversy right now. Having said that, we know the law that is in place, and we are still bound by it.
Okay.
Okay, ready?
Yep, good.
Our hearing today, the Bell Avenue, Bell Holdings LLC, Bell Avenue, Somerville. Mr.
Good evening, members of the board. My name is Michael O'Brodnick. I'm an attorney at Savo, Shaw, Seating Warner, Gillespie, O'Brodnick, and Fisher here in Somerville. On behalf of the applicant, Bell Avenue Holdings LLC, thank you.
Thank you.
We're here for a preliminary and final major site plan approval or application for Block 127, Lot 4, which is located currently at 6 to 10 Bell Avenue. Subject property is located in the single-family R2 district. This application proposes a demolition of the existing light industrial use on the property and constructing 38 multifamily residential units within 5 separate buildings, along with other site improvements, including stormwater management. Site is 166,368 square feet, or I believe just under about 4 acres, or 3 acres. As for relief, multifamily residential is not a permitted principal use in the R2 zone district. Therefore, this application, as discussed, necessitates a D1 use variance, in addition to a D floor area ratio variance where 30% is allowed, 35.3% is existing, and 69.3% is proposed, as well as a D6 height variance for the maximum building height, 2.5 stories and 35 feet is allowed, where this application proposes 2.5 stories and approximately 40 feet, 3 stories and approximately 40 feet. The applicant has also identified some bulk variances. Maximum improvement coverage, 40% is allowed, 60.9% is existing, and 65.5% is proposed. There's also a variance from Section 102-83D2, buildings within the 15-foot right-of-way, variance from 102-93B4. Refuse dumpsters are not permitted unless the applicant demonstrates to the board that there's no other method for refuse storage and pickup is feasible. Variance from Section 102-118E2, parking prohibited in the front yard on multifamily dwellings, and variance for an EV parking space that's not van accessible, which is a variance from Section 102-118C. Although I think we're going to perhaps make some adjustments that's going to eliminate some of these variances, I wanted to identify everything as part of my notice on the front side of this before there's any alterations made. I think it's important for this board and for the public to really kind of understand the developer's experience with this property and the history of this subject lot. It is a very unique property. This property was constructed 133 years ago. Looking at historical aerials today, there was pretty much nothing around that neighborhood at that time. Looks like in about 1915, 1920, 1925, you had most of the Bell Avenue constructed for the residential uses. The building on the site predates the zoning ordinance by about 60 years. And what that means is that it would be considered a pre-existing non-conforming use, okay? The site was actually operated by a very consistent tenant and owner from 1972 until 2020. It was a manufacturer for the microelectronics industry named Town Laboratories, which later was changed their name to Town Technologies. Technologies purchased that property in 1970 and sold it to the successor company, Town Technologies, in 1995. In 1980, in connection with expansion of that building, a board application was presented, and the use of property was determined to be "quote unquote" light industrial, and was considered a legally pre-existing non-conforming use. The applicant, when looking at acquiring this property, did extensive structural due diligence and, of course, unfortunately, extensive environmental due diligence. When the applicant purchased the property on March 4th, 2020, the building was filled with hundreds of tons of old, antiquated machinery, personal property, junk, file cabinets. And at that point, Town Technologies was winding down the business, and they entered into a 6-month use and occupancy leaseback to allow for that wind down. And at that time, once the existing longtime tenant was preparing to leave, the applicant listed the property with brokerage and began an extensive environmental remediation project, which continues to this day. Environmental remediation was required primarily for asbestos and removal and remediation of chlorinated volatile organic compounds, heavy metals, and polyaromatic hydrocarbons. Of course, the applicant retained a licensed site remediation professional and entered into an administrative consent order with DEP and funded out of pocket the entire cost of the remediation, which is in excess of $1 million, of course, in addition to the purchase of the property. To effectuate these environmental remediations, the applicant was required to remove large sections of the building floor, contaminated soil, equipment, groundwater treatment systems were installed, vapor mitigation systems, and replacement of concrete flooring in affected areas. In November 2021, the applicant's LSRP submitted a remedial investigation report to DEP. And at the same time, the applicant and the owner also retained Stonefield Engineering, a well-known large civil engineering firm in New Jersey, and Comito Architects to prepare the building for a new light industrial flex tenant once the remediation was completed. The applicant retained Tim DeLucia's group, and then again another realtor, Zimmel Associates, to search for the same type of light industrial use. On May 6, 2021, the applicant signed a lease with All Metal for 30,000 of the 40,000 square foot portion of the building, applied for a zoning permit, and the zoning officer at the time, John Muselli, issued the zoning permit to allow the continue of that use. In August of 2021, the applicant sought a zoning permit to expand the all-metal use for the entire 40,000 square feet of the footprint of the building, and at that point, the zoning officer rescinded his approval and indicated that the applicant was required to apply to the zoning board for relief. Unfortunately, as a result of the delay of the zoning officer, All Metal ended up terminating the lease, given the time constraints for their business to get through the zoning process. In November of 2021, our broker identified another light industrial type use, which was Renex New York Corporation. And on January 18th, 2022, Renex signed a lease with Bell Holdings. As part of that process, Renex was aware that we needed to go back to the Board of Adjustment to get a certificate of nonconforming use. And an application was made on March 9th after we engineered it, applied to this board for a certificate of nonconforming use pursuant to NJSA 4055 D68. And as I'm sure Mr. Gibbons will explain, or did explain at the time, that certificate of nonconformity was to have a hearing that would establish that light industrial use was a pre-existing non-conforming use and that it had not been abandoned, as it had been continuously used for that type of use for, as I said, about 160 years. Unfortunately, the board denied the application that the use was pre-existing non-conforming use, and they determined that the use was abandoned. Okay, and much of the decision related to the abandonment was based upon an ordinance provision that essentially says that if a property is vacant for a period of 12 months, there's a presumption of abandonment. The problem with that is that is entirely contrary to the law on abandonment. So we've...
Mr. Ogrodnik, if you want to recast this application, I would suggest, I'll instruct the board that the record and resolution of denial for that application previously speak for themselves. I think you're being a little bit, it seems to me that you're trying to recast the facts.
No, I disagree. I think
I disagree with you.
I think it's important that the board understands from the applicant's perspective
Well, the applicant, the applicant had ample opportunity to explain itself and couldn't do so, as is very well set forth in that resolution and in the record.
and we haven't
I
gone
would
to
suggest
we haven't gone to trial yet on that.
This matter remains in the Superior Court. We haven't gone to trial, but this is severable from that. You're seeking a different approval for a different application, and I don't think this is the place to re-argue the previous case.
I'm not re-arguing it.
Well, that's fine, because I'm telling you not to.
Okay. Well, it's my application, so I'm going to present
Well,
it.
it's my obligation
Yeah.
to instruct you not to. And
Well, I
and
think
I'll
it's- I
instruct
think
the
it's-
board accordingly.
I think it's important that the public understands that.
The public has participated in this, the public has participated in this process at great length.
Correct. So I think
The public wants to hear your side of the story, that's your prerogative, but not in this setting.
Okay. So again, I think it's important that the point of me saying this is that the pre-existing non-conforming use and the abandonment use is not yet resolved. It's being litigated, and there's certainly a potential that the light industrial use could return to the site should the court reverse and this board deny this application. So I think that's important for the public to understand that although that decision was made that the use was abandoned, that's not settled. That's not settled yet. So I think it's important that the public understands that. The applicant, of course, spent significant amounts of money to remediate the environmental remediation and the conditions in the building related to the pre-existing contamination. That was certainly not any fault of the purchaser in 2020. So after the denial, I wasn't part of that application. Didn't serve as counsel to that application. We began to have formal, informal discussions with the borough on what we feel would be an appropriate transition of this property away from industrial. I extensively reviewed the transcripts and obviously the concerns related to trip generation and truck generation specifically. We felt that it may be appropriate to transition this portion of the borough into a residential use, which is consistent with the zoning. Mm-hmm. We met with the borough on numerous occasions, and initially we proposed an apartment building. It was an L-shaped apartment building. It was about 90-something thousand square feet. It was a 3-story building, and it was an 88 unit building. And it was proposed to be a for-rent concept. And after we had additional discussions with the borough, it was conveyed to us that that perhaps wasn't the anticipated vision of that portion of the borough, and specifically related to the idea that it was for rent. I recall conversations about the borough desiring to have more for sale units and to have, there's a big lack of new construction and specifically in the townhouse, I guess until this development that we're in came about. So for the next year, we then listened to the borough and redesigned the project, reduced our unit count, our proposed unit count from 88 units to 38 units, and are proposing a townhouse concept that would be for sale. After collaboration with the borough, tweaking the plans, we are pleased to introduce this application for residential buildings, each consisting of between 12 and 4 units. The townhouses, and we'll get into much more detail with our architecture, range in size from about 1,500 square feet to 2,200 square feet. And the units contain 2 and 3 bedrooms. I know we had a discussion recently about a 4th bedroom option, and the applicant felt that we would be removing that voluntarily, that 4th bedroom option for some of the units. Site improvements include the fully compliant 93 parking spaces, which include a garage space for each of the units. So with that context, we have our professional team. Zachary Chaplin, he's our civil engineer from Stonefield Engineering. Jesse Robeson from KTGY, our architect. Traffic engineer John Korak, and our planner Spatch Trahan from Phillips Priest. Notice has been provided consistent with the municipal land use law. I also note that we noticed this application in October, but we ended up adjourning that meeting because of some comments from professionals related to some of the design elements and removing some of the variances. But they did get notice back in that time, as well as we indicated, the certified mails that went out on January 22nd.
Your notice is sufficient. And,
Yep.
the board has jurisdiction.
So with that, I would ask the board to swear in our civil engineer. We can briefly go over his qualifications, and then we can review the site plan.
Please stand and raise your right hand. You solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give in this matter will be the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Please state your name and spell your last name for the record.
Sure. My name is Zachary Chaplin, last name Chaplin. I'm with the firm Stonefield Engineering and Design, with offices located at 92 Park Avenue, Rutherford, New Jersey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ogrodnik. Your witness, sir?
Mr. Chaplin, could you kindly provide the board your educational experience and your professional licenses and whether they're still in good standing?
Sure. I received my bachelor's degree in civil engineering from the University of Delaware. I'm a licensed professional engineer in the states of New Jersey, New York, and Connecticut. And I've been accepted as an expert witness by multiple boards throughout the state, including other boards in Somerset County.
Could you name 3 in Somerset County?
Just Bridgewater in Somerset.
Okay. Okay,
I would,
we accept.
Mr. Chair, okay.
We accept.
Could you go over the preliminary and final site plan?
Sure. I don't know if this shares automatically. Oh, looks like it is. So I'm just going to give a brief overview of the existing conditions. I know Mr. Ogrodnik kind of already did that, but I'm going to refer to an exhibit, which I can mark. This is entitled Aerial Exhibit, prepared by Stonefield Engineering and Design, dated February 4th, 2025.
Were these filed with the board? It sounds like just done today?
Just today.
Yes, please, if you would, I ask that we mark these as, that as applicants A1.
Yeah. Seeing this tonight, right now. We didn't have this in our packet.
Yes, I was going to ask, but I mean,
It's just an aerial exhibit. It's just Google Earth. And again, it's just an overview of the site. And then the next exhibit's going to be the site plan.
Do you have any other exhibits that weren't submitted with the packet?
I imagine it would just be truck turning, which I think was submitted, so no.
well, Google Earth, I believe, because it's I guess the best way to say this is that like any other overhead shot, I believe since it's universally available, I believe the board can take judicial notice of the Google Earth depiction. But I would caution the applicant that if there's anything else that wasn't submitted under the 10-day rule, we'd appreciate it that you would correct that or present it at another time. Go ahead.
Understood. So just briefly on the site, it's 2.67 acres right along Bell Avenue. The site abuts NJ Transit Railroad to the south, and of course, there's the single-family homes to the west, north, and east. Under the existing conditions, you can see the existing building. It's kind of L-shaped to the west of the site. There's a loading area at the southeast corner of the site, and then storage and parking kind of within that easterly area. There's a grassed area all the way to the east. I would say aside from some trees around the perimeter, there's very little to no landscaping on the property today. The site is also accessed by just one curb cut on Bell Avenue to get onto the property. Just pulling up here the site plan. So the next exhibit that's loading is the site plan, which should pop in any moment. I do want to point out that it has been colorized and includes the landscaping, but there's no changes to the plan. It follows the plan that was submitted.
That should be marked as Exhibit A2 because it has been changed.
Okay. So this is essentially the site plan that was submitted to the board. As I just said, we've just added in the landscaping for aesthetic purposes and colorized it for the board and public's benefit. Under proposed conditions, we're proposing 5 townhouse buildings, 38 total units. I think when we look to lay out this site, kind of big picture, understanding how we're surrounded by single-family residences, what we did was on the west side of the property, that's where we are proposing green infrastructure, bioretention basin, and then a number of trees to kind of help buffer that western side. On the south side, of course, we're abutting the NJ Transit rail, so there's no residences there. Bell Avenue obviously is a street, and then on the east side, those 2 buildings actually have sort of a backyard along the east side of the property. The way the site is circumnavigated is there's 2 curb cuts on Bell Avenue. Those are essentially around the perimeters of A, B, and C. That's kind of like the front of where you'd enter the townhome. And in the rear, that's where you have your garages and where you'd come in with your car. So you've kind of screened, to a certain extent, the garages towards the interior of the site, and then also for building C, that southern building towards the back of the site. You don't necessarily have that direct sidewalk connection, but the main reason for that is, those buildings are a bit unique, and they kind of have that backyard to the eastern side, and then the garages on the west side. I do want to point out that there's a trash enclosure shown on the plan at the southeast corner. Just in discussions with the applicant, that's going to be removed. There will be a homeowners association agreement that'll be in place where owners can bring out trash receptacles on certain nights. They'll be picked up by a private hauler. So I believe one of those variances in relation to the trash enclosure, that can be removed. Mailboxes, although not shown on this plan, would be proposed at the southwest corner of the site. And should this project be approved, as a condition of approval, we would revise the plans to note that accordingly. And again, that would be a central location for everyone to pick up their mail. Snow storage areas, which were noted on the site plan, I do want to point out for Mr. Cole's letter, where there's conflicts with landscaping, those would be removed. If there was certain snow events that required the removal of the snow off-site, a private hauler would come and pick up the snow and bring it off-site so as to not conflict with landscaping. But I do want to note that, there obviously are some landscaped areas around the site for some removal of snow. There are 93 parking spaces with 89 required. So each owner will have a garage space as well as a driveway space. Then there are also 17 guest parking spaces. So the guest parking spaces are the parallel spaces located at the west side of the property. And then there's also 5 spaces split up towards the northern part of the property, and those would be the EV spaces. And I do want to point out that we will comply with the comment about providing a van access. We are proposing, like I mentioned, the green infrastructure bioretention basin to the west. So essentially, this whole area, kind of like right next to the curb line and the property line, that western area there would be a bioretention basin. The site stormwater would be conveyed to that basin. We are a major development per DEP requirements, and we are meeting all of those requirements in terms of quantity reductions and water quality. And all of the stormwater eventually gets conveyed. There's a culvert at the southwest corner of the property that actually goes under the railroad track. So we're matching those existing drainage patterns and meeting all of the state and local drainage requirements. I know there's a couple notes in Mr. Cole's report just about the specifics of geotech testing. We have some challenges just because of the location of the existing building compared to where we're proposing our basin. In discussions with him that we can work with him as a potential condition of approval to provide him what he needs, whether it's the testing post demolition, and or items from DEP. We're happy to work with him on that. All new utilities would be brought into the site. Sanitary, water, gas, electric mains would be provided to serve the users. Hydrants would be proposed to meet the fire officials' requirements and all the fire department connections. So we agree to comply with all the comments in the fire officials' report. From a lighting standpoint, I think it's going to be an upgrade compared to the existing conditions. Decorative light poles are proposed, 20 feet high. They're LED fixtures and downlit. We comply with all of the borough lighting requirements, and it would be the same fixture used throughout the development. From a landscaping perspective, I think that's where there is a significant upgrade as well. There are 29 deciduous trees proposed, 70 evergreen trees, and over 150 shrubs. You can see on the colorized rendering, we really made it a point to provide as much landscaping as we can, around the development, and then even to the extent, within the internal parts of the development as well. I know the number of variances that, Mr. Ogrodnik mentioned. I think just from a civil engineering standpoint, the lot coverage is what I would call a slight increase. But we are, I think, mitigating that to a certain extent, given the increase in the landscaping and the bioretention basin. So I think that helps, the 5% increase compared to the existing condition for the lot coverage. Just to kind of sum up, I think we are tasked with providing a site development for this townhome development. I think it's a safe and efficient layout. I think we provided an abundance of landscaping. The stormwater works. The lighting meets the requirements. I know there's a number of bulk variances in the use just because we're in a single-family zone.
Anybody from the board have any questions of the testimony just given by Mr. Chaplin? Okay.
Rich, I'm not sure your microphone is working.
Yeah, I usually talk loud enough, sorry about that.
No.
The hydrant system, who's going to own the hydrants?
So the water mains would be owned by New Jersey American Water via an easement. The hydrants, I can get back to you.
I know how that works.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. They'll be owned by the water company.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. The lot coverage, that went away, but the lot coverage, you've got dwelling units here that are multiple bedrooms. There's a bunch of threes, I think, and twos, and possibly a four, although you said you're going to delete that. What about recreational space? Because if you're going to have 2 or 3 bedrooms, you're going to have kids. There's no parks in that neighborhood at all. I grew up down there. I used to play on the tracks. You're not allowed to do that anymore. So
They do in New York. It's called
So,
subway surf.
where do you go with the mother with the carriage or the kids? I mean, where do you go?
Yeah, so we have taken a look at that. I don't know how to get the plan to pop back up, but, there we go. So by the north side of Building B, we have looked if, the board would like to see it. Essentially just like an enclosed area, both with fencing and landscaping, that would create kind of like an area for a children's play area that we can use this area and kind of shift around the landscaping. The other thing, I don't think this hot box is going to be needed, so the transformer could move and there'd be a decent amount of space above Building B where we could propose something.
So you're looking into it?
Yes.
So the culvert down at the southwest corner, and it drains underneath the railroad tracks, where does that drain after it gets past the railroad tracks?
I'd have to get back to you and look into it more. I don't know offhand.
I can't testify, but I do know.
So your study, your 20-page report that we have for the water, you're saying that, what is it, a detention basin to the west side of the property?
Bioretention basin.
Explain that.
So we look at a downstream point of interest, right? So where is our site? Where is the conveyance going today? So that point of interest is actually at our southwest corner of our site. And that's essentially the point of analysis for us, that we're saying, okay, at this point, are we, and per the requirements, we're not just reducing peak flow rates, but we have to meet reductions. So that's where we kind of look at our analysis from our calculations to make sure that we meet those requirements at that downstream point of analysis on our site.
Because right now, there's kind of like a ravine, I guess, what you call it, that goes from Bell Avenue all the way down to the culvert.
Yeah. So we actually submitted a verification request to DEP just to make sure that that wasn't regulated, and they came back and they claimed they don't have jurisdiction of it. So it's essentially an unregulated ditch that we are keeping intact, that is conveying some minimal runoff to that area that you're talking about.
Okay, so how about snow removal? You said that if it's a big snowstorm, you're gonna truck everything off property. How about for a 4 or 5 inch snowstorm? Where's the snow get piled up, and do you lose any parking spaces?
Yeah, I think, to the extent the bioretention area, that area could be used, and then those parallel spaces, the guest spaces, to the extent, those aren't really needed, we can use those areas as well. But again, I think management's gonna make that decision after time having the place get tenanted and understand how much those spaces are being used. And if they are being used, they would have to, hire that hauler to take the snow off site.
So how do you get the snow from the east side to the west side?
I think that's, the trucks would have to move it there. I mean, that's, and I think we're gonna have a little bit more area now that we're moving the trash enclosure. So specifically on that southeast side, that would be another area that we can put the snow.
Is it the homeowner's responsibility to clear the sidewalks and their driveway?
I don't know that offhand.
Mr. O'Brien, do you have
Tip-
anybody that's gonna talk about that?
I mean, we haven't gone that far into the HOA documents. Typically, for a community of this size, the HOA would be responsible for snow removal, other than potentially the sidewalks that are directly in front of the residences. But they would clear the driveways. Of course, there's going to be cars in the driveways there as well.
That it, Morgan? Anybody else on the board have any questions of Mr. Chaplin?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
Art. I see that there's 2 ways coming in. There's 2 entrances in.
That's correct. They're both full movement driveways.
Okay. I guess my question is that, do you think we will have enough room there for cars to safely pass, going and coming with those 2 entrances coming off of Bell Avenue?
Just because we have a traffic engineer coming up, I'm gonna direct
Let
that
him
question
defer to that?
him, yeah.
Okay.
Spending time there, or is it steeply sloped? I'm talking about the road trees on the west end of the property there.
Right, so this is a bioretention basin, and there's a guardrail, so this wouldn't be accessed by the tenants.
Okay,
And these are just shade trees.
okay. And then you were talking about potentially putting a play area on the north end of,
Well, there'll be a time for that. Mr. Chaplin, we've been doing a lot of construction in this town over the last several years, and one of the things that I'm getting concerned with is, can our electrical grid continue to handle what's being proposed?
And local requirements. I think there's a positive impact from what we're doing, just because, the peak reductions of flow rates, the introduction of green infrastructure. I think that's a positive. I think from your question on the electrical grid, that's something we're gonna have to, figure out with the utility company, and if we have to, spend money for upgrades to support it, we'll have to do that.
Anybody else on the board have any questions of Mr. Chaplin?
Yeah, I think I do. I'm back to where do the kids play? Is there any way to modify that site plan to give some place where kids can go and even adults can sit? I mean, it looks very urban to me. Not that I'm against urban, but I just like, kids run around and do things. And that's a condensed neighborhood. There really isn't any space over there.
And you got the two-way street.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's, that area I was talking about is 750, 800 square feet. I think, again, like if done right, you can fence it, put some landscaping in there, benches, play set of some kind. I think there is enough space there. The board would like to see that.
Yeah, I would.
I would.
Yeah.
I would definitely like
Yeah.
to see that.
Because there's gonna be kids there, and kids are kids, and if they're not occupied, they're going somewhere.
Yeah.
Anybody else on the board have any questions?
Yeah, 6 inches. And then, so if those units have children and they're playing in the backyard, what's the barrier between their backyard and the neighboring what's the barrier between their backyard and the neighboring properties?
It's a 6-foot vinyl fence.
Okay.
Well, come to the microphone, identify yourself.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening, Mr. Willett.
My name is Harold Willett, 44 North Bedore Street, Somerville, New Jersey. My question is to about the exits and out of the proposed property on the Bell Avenue. You say there's going to be 2 driveways in and out.
Yes.
My question is, my question is that feasible as far as 2 cars coming out of each driveway or going out into Bell Avenue at the same time, or going in at the same time?
I'm going to defer to, we have a traffic engineer that's going to be better equipped to answer this question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Okay.
Anyone else have any questions of the testimony just given?
Good evening,
Good
gentlemen.
evening.
George Palco, 21 Bell Avenue. So,
That's a name from the past.
my wife is watching on YouTube. Hello, hon. She'll be mad if I don't say that. I want to address the water issue. You mentioned the line of trees, which I can't see now.
Speak into the mic.
I'm sorry, got to be closer. All right.
There you go.
Thank you.
The water issue, I'm not sure if you're aware, but we have a water problem on Bell Avenue. The mayor has been over, a number of borough officials have been over looking at it, and I have some pictures to demonstrate, and it impacts on town labs. And I'd like to enter these in if I can. This is a picture of Bell Avenue during a heavy rain, not during a hurricane, just a heavy tropical rain. The circles are the storm sewers. So part of the problem is the county, I think, engineered and redid some of the storm sewer lines. It backs up with a heavy rain in no time at all. Here's another picture. Bell, the sidewalks are totally covered, so it's probably going to go down your driveway. You mentioned the gully on the side, and that's my concern.
Just want to ask, sir, you took these photos yourself?
Absolutely.
Very
Over
good.
different periods of time,
All
not
right,
just one time.
that's fine.
This is my backyard. This is my major problem, and that's because the storm sewers back up. It goes into my backyard, goes into the yards behind me. I know that it's not your problem, but this may make the problem worse. This is another shot of the road. That's the gully you were mentioning, and that's the main overflow where the water goes. If not for that, God only knows how, it'd probably come into my house, some of my neighbors' yards. Ida, the worst of the worst. That's my driveway. It looks like rapids. And again, it's like a river going down the side of Town Labs. So I don't want to get, neither do my neighbors, into a situation where the water gets worse, comes into my foundation, does damage, and I'm put in a position, as will some of my neighbors, of had to take some kind of legal action and go back to the applicants, only to have you guys say, well, the town approved it, so it's their problem, not ours. So I'm not sure, you mentioned the retainer basement and basin, and I've had that with my backyard with when they developed, there were single-family homes. They paved basically majority of it when businesses moved in. It was going to be okay with a retention basin, with a storm sewer, and it did nothing. It still floods my backyard, my neighbor's backyard. So I think that's something that is going to have to be giving a lot of serious thought. And I'm not sure what those trees and that basin that you're mentioning is going to do. You did mention about keeping that gully, which I hope you do.
This is a
Perhaps
question,
you
right,
can put
Mr.
some
Palco?
piping in there or something.
Mr.
I don't know.
Palco, this is a question, right? Because right now you're giving
Yeah, I
testimony.
know I'm going on, but
Yeah,
yeah,
there'll be a
basically-
time for that. There
All right.
will be a time for comments.
I'm happy to address it. I think, the one thing to note is that the water shouldn't be coming onto our property, right? So, Bellhab should have the capability of collecting and conveying the runoff elsewhere. With that said, if it's doing it now, we're happy to take a closer look and work with, the board engineer to either, clean out that swale, replace it with a pipe, upgrade it, if that's really gonna help the neighbors, and, if the infrastructure in Bell is just not sized appropriately, we're happy to take a closer look at that, which could really improve the conditions. As a reminder, our site sits lower, which I'm sure you know.
Right.
It kind of slopes in once you get in, so we don't have any runoff from our site that's gonna make its way to Bell Ave. It's all going south. So to the extent we can look into that and just, widen it, make it bigger, maybe put in a pipe, I think the applicant would be happy to do that.
All right. Should I enter these or not?
May I just, how many photographs? Sorry, I just
There's
want
like 4 here.
4 or?
4 or 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
All right, my suggestion would be we'll call this P for public, 1. And, please put them in the order that you would want them to be, because that'll be P1A, P1B, P1C, P1D, and P1A.
All right.
We'll give those to Ryan.
Both in identification and in the record. And if you would give those to the board secretary, I'd appreciate it.
I appreciate it.
I presume there are no objections to the introduction. Thank you, Mr. Ogrodnik.
Anyone else from the audience have any questions on the testimony given by Mr. Chaplin? Questions?
It's a question. Good evening. My name is Caroline Breheny. I live on Cornell Boulevard, so around the corner from this development. My question is also about the water. It was hard to tell from the plan because it's flat, but that gully along the side, I assume it will have some depth to it, right?
It's existing and we're not proposing to change it.
Okay, but it's not, I think it would become more obvious. So my concern is, because as certain members of the boards has mentioned, there are children who will probably move into this development. There are already children in the neighborhood. Is there concern about it being an attractive nuisance to those children when it is filled with water?
I think we'd be happy to fence it off. This way, just no one can gain access.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else have any questions of Mr. Chaplin? No?
Rob Bay at 43 North Midoff Street. I want to address the backyards of the, on the east end. You said they are 8 foot deep.
They vary, so the property line is angled. So I think, at the widest point, it's probably closer to 20 feet. Then as it gets pinched, the most narrow point is 8 feet to the patio. 8.6 feet to the patio. That's the most narrow point.
Okay, and how wide are they?
The patios?
Yes.
I would say about 6 feet.
Okay. And what about the height of the building on that end?
We're gonna have an architect who can answer all the
Okay.
questions about the
Okay.
building. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Anyone else? Yes, come on.
My name is Nancy Krieger. I live at 46 Middle Street, Somerville. I have two comments.
Now, we're doing questions now, ma'am.
Well, okay, what are you gonna do with the sycamore trees that are there? Over 100-year-old, beautiful sycamore trees.
We're looking to keep the ones on the perimeter to the extent we can. Obviously, the ones that,
What does that mean, to the extent that you can?
it means that when we start construction, we'll look to keep them, and if it's impossible, then we can't.
And if it's impossible, you'll cut them down.
If, to build a project, certain trees do need to be removed.
That provides a lot of shade to a lot of people on both Middle and Bell Avenue. The second question I have is, I'm not sure who it was, mentioned 93 parking spaces for this monstrosity. Why does it say 139 parking spaces on the application? Which I
I'm not-
just got today. So this is the current 139, and I heard somebody say 93.
It's 93.
It's what?
93.
90?
93.
Then why does this say 139 parking spaces?
May have been a prior iteration. The plans were
Well-
changed from the initial application to the final.
So when you make changes to the application, don't you have to put a new application in?
No.
Oh, so you can make any change you want, not tell anybody about it, and hope that we don't catch it.
No, that's our job.
No,
Thank you.
the application was on file.
Since, I know, I see, I got two of them, one's April 17th to 2024, of which I also brought to the attention of the zoning board that it was not a complete application. Because they didn't.
Do you have a question for the engineer?
Okay.
I do
Anyone
want
else?
to. I do want to just add. There's 4 trees along Bell that we are saying that are going to remain, and then there's a couple that we're saying are going to be removed. So the ones that we can keep, we're going to keep. We're not going out of our way to remove trees.
You'll put that in writing?
It's on the plan.
It's- Anyone else? None? Thank you, Mr. Chaplin.
Thank you.
Mr. Ogradnik?
Thank you. Our next witness is our architect, fresh from drive up from Washington, D.C. His name is Jesse Robeson. He's at KTGY.
Good evening, sir. I'm glad that you survived being down in the Capitol. Would you be so kind as to raise your right hand? You solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give in this matter will be the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please state your name and spell your last name for the record.
Jesse Robeson, Robeson.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ogrodnik, your witness, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Robeson, could you kindly go through your educational experience, your professional experience, what you've been doing for the last 20 years in your practice?
Yes, so I worked for KTGY. I have worked there for approximately 4 years. Prior to that, I have been working as an architect for 15 years approximately, since graduating from Virginia Tech with a Bachelor of Architecture in 2010.
Yeah.
Okay.
May I just ask?
Have you appeared before any boards? Any local?
None local myself. My firm has multiple times, though.
May I just ask if your New Jersey license is current?
I am not licensed in New Jersey. I'm licensed in Virginia. My boss and multiple other people are licensed in New Jersey, and they supervise the project above me.
Well, the record will so reflect that the witness is not licensed in New Jersey. Do you work under the supervision of a New Jersey architect?
Yes, I do.
All right.
Okay. That came up before, several years ago, and Dennis had a problem with that.
I have concerns about it. Yes. I have concerns about it. I mean, I think it would be appropriate to have someone who's New Jersey licensed. I'm not trying to throw a wrench into your application, but that's candidly kind of customary.
Yeah, we had this discussion when we were preparing, and we did have the licensed architect that was.
You didn't have it with me.
No, but we felt it would be more appropriate for the architect that designed the whole project to testify, with the understanding that obviously anything submitted would be under sign and seal of a licensed New Jersey architect.
She's my boss, and she's licensed in New Jersey. So she. She is. She reviews the drawings. She has less familiarity with the project than I do, so I'm much better prepared to answer the questions that may come than she is. She is familiar with the project, but she is not as prepared as I am to answer questions from the board.
To be honest with you, and I don't like to say this, but I object to this because I think it should have been prepared by, I think it should have been, testimony should be provided. You're in New Jersey, and it would seem routine that a New Jersey architect would be testifying and verifying and answering questions.
I understand.
Yeah, it's not the first time this has come before us, and our previous attorney did have a serious problem with that.
I think our current attorney has a serious problem.
Well, I'd be interested in knowing what the applicant is prepared to do to alleviate the situation.
I think what makes sense perhaps is that we have Mr. Robeson testify, since he designed this project primarily, and then at a later date we can have the signatory with the license affirm or answer any additional questions should the board have any questions remaining. I can tell you that the planning board in Somerville doesn't have a problem with this, and
planning board.
Well, that's
many.
the planning board,
I
it's a
know.
different board and a
I understand that,
different approach.
but I will tell you that it's not atypical for the project manager to be the primary witness for testimony, since they've
Well, then I believe in New Jersey witness. I mean, I'll leave it up to the board. I mean, you know how I feel about it. I've indicated my objection. That doesn't mean you have to listen to me. I mean, I think you would have done better had you brought, if necessary, to have one witness testify as to the entirety of the project based upon his familiarity with it. The New Jersey professional that he worked under, who he's already acknowledged does another project as well, should have been here to testify and verify. I believe that's the applicant's duty.
Well, as I said, I think.
And what you said about the planning board, this is a separate board. I mean, I will tell you, I appear before boards all the time, and it is an issue.
Yeah, and I understand that. I mean, I think we can address this two ways at the pleasure of the board. We can move to traffic testimony, and or we can have Mr. Robeson testify, and then at the next meeting potentially bring in the signatory from.
May I suggest that you do that and make sure that you have a New Jersey representative at the next hearing?
Sure, that's fair.
And someone who's also prepared to testify and answer questions as appropriate.
Absolutely.
And would have comparable, if not identical, familiarity with the application.
Right.
And with that in mind, I mean, I believe it would be appropriate for you to move on to your next witness.
I think
Okay.
so too.
All right, that's fine.
Mr. Chairman, are you inclined, you had talked about, before we go on, I know you had said something about a recess, I mean,
Oh, yeah, we're getting ready to recess around 8:30,
8:30, okay, very good.
Fingers okay that one, Mike?
right?
John Korak?
Mr. Clark, would you stand, please, and raise your right hand? You solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give in this matter will be the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Please state your name and spell your last name for the record.
John Korak, last name spelled Corak.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ogrodnik?
Mr. Korak, how long have you been at Stonefield?
A little over 10 years.
And where did you go to college?
I went to college at the College of New Jersey,
And what was your degree?
civil engineering.
And are you a licensed professional engineer in the state of New Jersey?
I am a licensed professional engineer in the state of New Jersey. My expertise is in traffic engineering specifically. I testify on a near nightly basis in front of land use boards. I've testified before over 100 boards in the state, including several.
Name three?
In Somerset County, most recently Bernardsville, Branchburg, and Bridgewater.
Oh, the three Bs.
May I also add Pequannock Township?
Yes,
So you're
we
familiar
have
with
many,
Yes, I
many
am.
long nights at Pequannock Township with Mr. Gibbons.
Mr. Adair, I'd ask you that you accept him as
I
in the
do.
field of traffic
We
engineer.
do.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. So, as part of this application from a traffic engineering perspective, we were asked to review the anticipated traffic impacts associated with this size development, right? So what we have proposed here is it's a 38-unit townhouse development, 93 parking spaces, 2 driveways along Bell Avenue. And looking to get this back on the screen. There we go. Great. So a townhouse development, fairly customary in terms of its design. As part of this project, it probably went a little bit above and beyond what we would typically do for an application of this size. What's standard for residential, multifamily residential applications of this size is to forecast trip generation, understand how many trips are anticipated in the peak hour, and with that, you can typically conclude from a traffic engineering perspective that at 38 units, or these, what I'll say, smaller residential developments in the grand scheme of land development, not talking about the specific parcel or otherwise, but in the grand scheme, where we have 100, 200, 300, 500 unit projects, this is a smaller application, certainly from a traffic perspective. What we typically do is forecast the traffic and be able to draw a conclusion from that without the need of detailed counts. In this case, given the long history on the project, we've prepared numerous iterations of the traffic study as the development program has evolved, dating back from the industrial use through the multifamily apartment use, now to the townhouse use. And that included traffic counts on the neighboring state highways to understand essentially when this traffic branches out and is ultimately looking to make turning movements at busier intersections, how is it impacting those intersections? How is it routing itself and affecting the community at large? Because Bell Avenue today, it's not a highly traversed roadway. And with the addition of this traffic, would not be substantially impacted from the addition here. As it relates to peak hour traffic, we forecast that using the Institute of Transportation Engineers trip generation manual. This is the industry standard for forecasting traffic from land development applications. They have hundreds of different types of land uses categorized within the manual, and that comes from data collected by traffic engineers like myself at comparable projects. So in this case, we look specifically at a townhouse type use, an attached multifamily use that is not an apartment use, but it's specific to townhouses. And when we forecast that traffic and then route it onto the roadway network, what we're ultimately looking to do is create a level of service analysis comparing the existing conditions all the way up to the build-out condition at the subject intersections in the vicinity of the site. When we add the traffic from the project, route it to those neighboring intersections, and compare the differences between existing condition and build condition, we are looking at minuscule increases in delay for the vehicles that are on the roadway and the new vehicles associated with the project. We're talking increases of less than 1 second, sometimes in the case certain movements at 0 to 0.1 seconds. So extremely small changes in terms of what your average delay is, because the traffic generated from this type of development is not very significant. That is certainly not a significant impact. It doesn't rise to the level of significant impact by any traffic engineering standard, whether that's with the ITE, the NJDOT, or otherwise. Moving inward to site circulation and access, we do propose the 2 driveways on Bell Avenue. Those driveways are each 26 feet wide. Residential site improvement standards for right-angled parking areas look for a 24-foot wide aisle, so we're a little bit wider than that with the 2 26-foot wide aisles, and that's sufficient to accommodate two-way flow in and out of the site from Bell Avenue. Complement that with the low traffic volumes generated by a townhouse application of this size, and we don't forecast any adverse impacts from having 2 driveway points with full movement access, conflicts on Bell Avenue or with the 2 driveways operating on the site. And ultimately, the site circulation and access plan here is very favorable as it relates to site development. Lastly, parking is always a major issue with the traffic studies that we conduct and perform. We do provide 93 parking spaces on the property, which is in compliance with the parking requirements. The townhouse units each have the garage space plus driveway space, along with the 17 surface parking spaces that provide the guest parking, for the residents, guest parking, guests of the residents on the site itself. Included in that guest parking are the required make-ready electric vehicle charging parking spaces that are required under state statute, so we'll be in compliance with that requirement as well. Overall, this project from a traffic engineering perspective is not a substantial impact on the roadway network. It is a drop in the bucket in terms of traffic added to the greater roadways in the immediate vicinity, whether that's 206 or Route 28. And it's something that, when we're looking at the potential development for this larger site, it's something that from a traffic perspective can work well with the surrounding uses and within the neighborhood itself.
Could you just speak to the ingress and egress onto Bell Avenue and snow removal and storage plan?
Yeah, the ingress and egress to Bell Avenue, again, 2 driveways that are each full movement driveways. They allow left turns and right turns in and out. In terms of snow removal, Mr. Chaplin did speak to this, utilizing a lot of the green space that's on the site if we have a smaller snowfall event, and the larger events snow would be carted off the site in order to maintain the open drive aisles and access for the residents on the site.
I have no further questions for the witness.
Anybody from the board have any questions?
I do. You looked at the overall traffic patterns and flow. Did you look at the internal movements?
On the site itself?
Yeah.
Yeah, so internally, we did, right? And internally, trying to zoom in a little bit, what we do have here is drive aisle widths that are compliant with the residential site improvement standards, where we look for at least 24-foot wide aisles. And between A and B, they're 24. Other drive aisles, they're 26. And we feel comfortable with those movements.
How about pedestrian movement?
Yeah, pedestrian movements are accommodated via sidewalks, which have been added to this plan, and connect up to Bell Avenue and to several of the buildings on the site.
D&E don't have sidewalks.
D&E don't have the direct sidewalk connection, no. You would typically use the sidewalk along B and then cross the aisle, at your townhouse.
Yeah, well, I guess I'm not typical. If I see where I'm going, I'm going. I'm not making right-angle turns. I mean, but I'm just concerned about pedestrian movements and kids inside there. Again, I'm back to kids, bicycles, all that kind of stuff. And it looks to me like there's a lot going on in there, and somebody's likely to get run over.
Yeah, so one of the things that we can look at with Mr. Chaplin, we talked about the 26-foot aisle. Looking at the residential site improvement standards, their minimum's 24.
Yeah.
Widening up the sidewalk a little bit to provide more pedestrian, space for them, and make sure that we're, providing the connections that are necessary.
You don't think that's I'm sorry, Roberta. I promise to finish.
No, you're probably gonna ask it anyway.
The people coming out of D&E, they're walking in the road, basically.
It's in the drive aisle unless they cross over to the crosswalk that's just on the other side.
Yeah, but drive aisle road, to me, it's where the cars are gonna be going and bicycles and everything. And you think that's functional that way?
I've seen it work in numerous configurations, but if it's something that's a sticking point for the board, we can look into it.
Well, I'm just
Yeah.
one voice, but when I look
Yeah.
at that, it's like, I can picture people wandering around out there.
It's not typically what we see of a townhouse development, but the point is well taken.
I'm sorry. I don't see any indications for stop signs. I'm sure we'll probably need. I see the pedestrian walkway, but is there a need for a stop sign at least to the two egress and ingress off of Bell Avenue?
Yeah. So at near where the cursor is, there is there is a sign posted there. It doesn't have a direct call out on this exhibit, but that would be a stop sign. There's a similar one at the other driveway as well. We do have stop bars on the roadway or on the internal drive aisles at those internal intersections, and I believe signs as well. It's a little bit tough to see with the landscape overlay, but.
And my second question is, what studies guessed of some of the units that are going to be there? I just don't. I know it's 26 feet wide, right? But that's taken into consideration of the sidewalk along Building A and Building B, right?
The 26 excludes the sidewalk.
26 excludes the sidewalk.
Yeah, so that's just
Street.
cartway width for vehicles.
Okay. So again, my question is, what studies have been done to kind of make us feel comfortable with a two-way traffic, assuming that, a lot of these homeowners are going to have deliveries and things of that nature, anything that you can say to support that's a good size width to have a two-way flow traffic?
Yeah, so what we typically see for a project like this, the main thing is to be able to accommodate the delivery vehicles interior to the site, not on Bell Avenue. That's the number one priority, right? So we're not looking to stage your Amazon delivery vehicles or otherwise, outside of the site, but instead coming onto the site, and they would, like they do on typical roadways, they would utilize the sides of the access aisles, the drive aisles on the site, and stage to conduct their deliveries. That said, the traffic volumes that you have going on these aisles while deliveries are taking place, or really at any time of day, is very low, and it's very easy to navigate through the site, even if there is a delivery vehicle staged there. If in the off chance that there is another vehicle oncoming, if the delivery vehicle is in your lane of travel, you wait for the oncoming vehicle and then you proceed. But it's not a situation where you've got a truck blocking Route 28 and there's hundreds of cars coming at you. This is one car, typically zero, but one car maybe coming the other way.
Somerset Street at 5 o'clock.
Another good example.
and West End Avenue.
and West End Avenue.
Yes, go ahead.
Why wouldn't you put crosswalks by building D and E so that people can safely cross over to the sidewalk at building B?
Right, right.
Yeah,
I mean, you need these people are coming out and now. Well, no, no, because you don't do that on a street. But why don't you, if you had two crosswalks, I mean, that would increase safety, but the other problem that I see is you've got your entrance, you've got two-way traffic, and now, so you have two-way traffic coming down to the intersection by building C. Somebody crossing there could possibly be impacted by traffic heading north and south and east and west. So I think it's good that you have crosswalks, but I don't know how safe they are, because now they could be contending with 4 vehicles as somebody's trying to cross the road. But you definitely need crosswalks for the 2 outlier buildings on the east. That's just ridiculous that you don't even have them there.
Yeah, we can certainly explore that. I'll explore it with
Well, I
our
don't think you
engineer, Mr.
explore
Chapman.
it, you need to put them in, because somebody's coming out, and now you got 2 cars coming in each direction. They're trying to cross just to get to the sidewalk. It's not to explore, it's to put them in.
Correct.
I know it's
choice of language on my part, and I
Yeah.
apologize.
Yeah.
When I'm saying explore, I mean actually go through the engineering design process, locate crosswalks appropriately, make sure the grading works, the lighting. There's some site features, say this light pole on the other side, it's gonna have to be moved. All these things play into it, and the safety is the number one thing. So we will make sure that that is accounted for.
Okay.
I think this should be passed on to our traffic officer, or traffic police officer.
Yeah.
Because John Covert retired, so whoever replaced him would check, send that to. Mike, could you see that? We get that to the police?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So it kind of appears to me that we sacrifice some things, green space, sidewalks, to get the maximum size buildings in there. It seems like we are missing sidewalks and we're missing a little bit of front lawns. Is that parallel parking on the west side of the curb there?
So this parallel parking on the west side, the question, I guess.
That was more of a statement to begin with, but the question
Yeah.
is that parallel parking on the west side there?
Yes, it is. Yes, these are 12 of the 17 guest parking spaces.
Did you run this as a one-way at all, to give us a little more space around the buildings, so walkways at all, or?
Haven't explored that in too much depth. I'm not, at first glance, not immediately opposed to it. Typically residents prefer not to have to recirculate the entire site. They want to take the direct route, but I think with the traffic volumes that a site like this would generate, you're not going to see a lot of conflict out there with vehicles.
Did you do any real traffic studies, like real-time traffic studies, like peak hours at all on Bell Ave? Did you see any like high traffic times or anything like that?
So our counts were a little bit further from the site at Bell Ave, but over at 206 at the signal, and then up on 28. I believe it was Meadow Street.
In the middle, in the west end.
Did I read that right? I have in the report that level of service is decreasing for that one intersection. Is that correct? From a C to a D? I'm referring to page 34 of my report. I understand what you said. I just caught that in the report that had a decrease in the level of service, which is a fancy way of saying there's a delay more than 1 second.
Right, so that we do have in one singular movement during the morning peak hour. We go from a C to a D. The C is at 23.6 seconds on average, down to 25.6, so it's 2 seconds. The reason it goes from C to D is because the threshold between the two is 25 seconds. So
Right there.
Right, so if you were at 24.9 and went to 25.1, that's C to D. Now, this is a 2-second change. It's virtually imperceptible to motorists. But that is correct, yes.
So,
I was just gonna say, this is New Jersey. We know a 2-second delay and what can happen.
so true. So true. So for the sidewalks with buildings A, B, and C, how wide are they?
On the plan currently, they're 3 feet wide sidewalks.
And they abut right up to the buildings themselves?
There's a little bit of green space between the buildings. I'll zoom in on. About a 2-foot space between the sidewalk and the buildings.
Okay, and then I see those rectangular boxes. Are those awnings for the entrances or something?
Yeah.
Above? My engineers informed me they're utility rooms.
Are those utility boxes interrupting the sidewalk?
Sorry, I'm trying to answer questions, getting information from the plan preparer. I really don't want to speak out of turn here, because I'm clearly
understood.
going down a road I shouldn't be going down.
Okay.
In terms of guessing.
Okay, so those are 3-foot sidewalks. Those are standard width, I would presume?
3 foot is the minimum under the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA requirement.
Okay. And then parking. Do you anticipate any need for overflow parking on Bell Avenue itself?
No.
During the Super Bowl or anything like that?
No. So the typical analogy for buildings like this, multifamily, whether it's townhouses or or apartments, is that frequently the holiday events where everyone gathers at a location typically don't happen in these units because they're too small. They're not equipped to host those larger gatherings where you see 20 cars arrive and everyone meets for Super Bowl, Thanksgiving, whatever it might be. It's just the nature of these multifamily applications.
2,200 square feet, that's a decent size.
And it's not.
You haven't met my family. But anyway, with regards to the possibility, is there any restrictions you could place within the homeowners agreement in terms of the use of Bell Avenue?
Now, even if there were, who's gonna police it?
I'm not familiar with one, but
From my perspective, one of the main goals from the first meeting we had was an adequate parking for this site. I would say that much of the design was based upon trying to achieve compliant parking and guest parking, and that was one of our design objectives that we are meeting. And we know from all the other projects that I have in town, it's quite a challenge to get to two stalls per unit. So we are compliant.
Anybody else from the board have any questions?
So just go back to the snow plow. So there's a guardrail that goes on the south side and also on the west side. And we just heard that we may be fencing in the little ravine on the west side. So in your opinion, with the snow removal and a 4-inch, it's not a lot of snow, where's the snow go where you don't lose any parking?
right. So there are spaces down at the southwest side. It's not a ton of green room, but that area is open, as well as some of the landscape areas on the side, as well as I believe Mr. Chaplin noted the trash enclosure being relocated or removed, and so that would open up a little bit of area there as well.
That's a little bit of an area. Do you think it's adequate?
I think that if and when the need arises for snow removal, that you can't store it on site without impacting parking, it'll have to be hauled off. 4 inches of snow, fluffy snow, compact snow is, it's an operational concern that would need to be handled appropriately.
Who's going to police that?
Well, becomes part of the resolution as well as, into the homeowners association agreement.
Anybody else on the board have any questions of the testimony just given?
I have one more question. Looks like the condensers are on those islands by those driveways. Is that what's going in there? Condensers?
Yeah.
Right by the. Huh.
Is it safe?
AC.
Is it safe? I don't know. I feel they're going to get hit.
What's Bob said?
One last question about the parking, the guest parking on the west side. Is there a sidewalk there, so when people on the passenger side of the car or driver side of the car get out onto the west side, that they are on a sidewalk?
None proposed right now, no.
Okay.
Anybody else have any questions? Anyone? Before we do the public questions, we'll take a little break. And we'll come back to you. We're gonna take a little break.
How you doing? Good to see you. Good to see you.
Oh, I did see that. Yeah. Like this is their option. Yeah, that this is that basically. I didn't like that. I didn't like that. That's now that you point that out.
That's when I was, no, that's when I closed the book. I don't care what he has to say, it's a no for me.
I didn't catch that. Thank you for pointing that out. Right?
How else should I interpret that?
Yeah, yeah.
The publishing, if this doesn't go through, it could revert back to like.
Listen, my position is, I actually was happy.
Yes, oh, absolutely.
Right? Because I didn't really mean it throughout the listing.
Yeah.
But town community, some of the private ownership, contribution taxes, whatever. But it's not a mistake. And this can be a fabulous project. I just hate the fact that this effing up on the critical things. How you not gonna have an architect? That's licensed in New Jersey.
Red flag.
Come on. That
He said, I wasn't aware. So do it, it could revert back to like.
Right, yeah.
What does that mean?
I didn't catch that.
I didn't like that. Like, why did you need to say that?
Yeah,
Yeah, no,
apartments. This is this is how it goes.
Yes.
It goes like this.
Yes.
And then you have the little few spaces, and then you have the spaces in front, and they have a little landscape before you get to the front.
There's an empty lot on Fairview Avenue, Fairview and Lozier. There's three
Right.
houses on the north side of Fairview.
Okay.
And then there is a fenced-in empty lot that cannot be developed because it is owned by
Yes.
the HOA on
HOA,
on Lozier. And so they don't even use it, but at least they have space. At least they can say we have space.
oh, we can use a little tiny spot for the
Yeah.
kids.
But but we don't have any recreation space on Loser. But inside Loser, it's all one way, right?
But on you have Lozier here, and then you come down to Fairview. So there are three houses up from the corner of Fairview.
It's behind. Okay, so as I'm off of Main Street, I make the left on the Loser. Then there's an entryway to get into the town development. Behind the town development, you're talking about that space that they own that they do nothing with.
It's a totally empty lot, fenced in, they just put a fence on it actually. It fronts. So, I mean, even if they had that, and nobody ever uses it, even if a Lozier don't use it, but they are contractually obligated, they can never sell it. Because you could put a little house in there, that's their communal green space.
Green space. Is it being manicured, maintained?
Yeah,
So they maintain it, but nobody really uses it.
But at least they can say, got the space.
They have the space.
But this is just from a safety perspective.
I don't like it. I saw that the first thing. I'm like, what? You got two-way streets? They say 20. There's no way. You know how many more delivery apps now? Like you got Instacart, Grubhub. You know you got all these different FedEx making deliveries.
Okay, let's resume. I think we're at the point where we're asking for the audience if they have any questions of the testimony just given. Is there anyone from the audience that have any questions of the testimony just given? Come on up. Please state your name and address and spell your last name, please.
Janice
Want to wait for?
with,
Okay, let's wait 1 second till our attorney gets back. Sorry about that.
that's okay. Okay. Is he ready?
Three next week, too.
No problem. Ready? Okay, Mrs. Holder.
First name Janice with an S, Janis. Mays Holder, Mays hyphen HOLDER. I live at 13 Bell Avenue. My question is, was there a count done on traffic on Bell Avenue?
Like directly in front of the site?
No,
Well, 'cause
Well,
there was-
from Middle to Cornell
Cornell?
Boulevard.
Not directly, no.
No, after regular. Well, I'd just like to tell you that that street is a hazard and has been a hazard for the last number of years. The traffic, it goes through our street to avoid 206. And it's insane. We almost had a child hit by a car, a child who was deaf and was playing outside, and I saw, and,
We're getting into testimony
okay,
now.
I'm sorry. That's the
There'll be a
teacher with me.
there'll be a time for that.
Okay, I'm sorry, but we almost had an accident. I mean, we did have an accident, but, and we've had, what do you call, it? Motorcycles up and down the street, and we call, and nothing is, but anyway, I think you need a count, because there are a lot of cars just trying to make, to deviate 206, and sorry for talking so much.
No problem. But that is a universal problem. Two things that we're all faced with in this 2.36 square miles of amazing, as the mayor calls it. Flooding and speeding. I don't think there's a street in town that people don't speed, and unfortunately, most of the speeding is done by residents in that neighborhood. Okay. Anyone else?
That would be me. Yeah, do I do it again? Nancy Krieger, 46 North Middle Street, Somerville. I'd ask you guys to indulge me for a minute.
This form of questions.
Only?
Questions only.
Okay.
Of the testimony just give. There will be time for comments. There will be time for
What are
comments.
you gonna do about this?
Well,
This is in front of my house. You cannot go down, two cars cannot go down that street at the same time.
These are all the same photograph?
Yes, they are.
And you took them?
And I took them from my porch.
Okay.
And you can see, when there's traffic on both sides, two cars, somebody's gotta back up.
Well, I think you should direct your comment to the board, only because I just want to make sure
I just wanna
that-
make sure that everybody sees the pictures,
Okay, we're going to admit that in evidence as P2,
okay?
P2 for public, 2.
You want me to put that on there? Oh, you'll do it?
Can you pass that on? I would like to see it.
Okay. P2 for public 2 in evidence.
And I can tell you why that happened, but if you want me to wait,
you wait, because that's testimony. And
To their attorney.
you might wanna have it, please, for me.
Okay.
I'll be back.
Mr. O'Brien, did you get a copy, did you see a copy of that? Okay.
I did, and I have no objection to public too.
That's impossible.
Yes, sir.
Jim Von Schilling, I live at 42 North Midoff Street. Two questions. One is, do you know the width of Bell Avenue?
It's 28 feet from curb to curb.
Yeah, it's how does that strike you? I'm on that virtually every day. It's a narrow street, and if there's cars parked on both sides, and a car's coming opposing you, somebody's got to get out of the way. It's a very narrow street.
Yeah, that's something that I see, not uncommon on residential streets where they allow parking on either side and you cannot pass, two cars side by side, and someone has to wait in an open area for the other oncoming traffic to pass. It's something that we see in residential streets somewhat commonly.
Yeah, okay. And then the other question has to deal, you're right in looking at West End and 206 because Bell Avenue goes nowhere. You have to get off Bell to do any, and you have to come from other streets to get onto Bell. So North Midaw is the destination on one end, and Cornell Boulevard is the destination on the other end. And when you're doing the traffic study, North Midaw, going down to Somerset Street, are you aware of the fact that there's a new development showing up there that they're going to get rid of the warehouse that's been there and put in again multiple housing? So because we've been here before because of the parking situation, traffic situation on North Midaw because of a project that was approved, and I don't know whether you took that into account when you estimated how much traffic, because we back then we thought it was too much traffic with that development, and now you're coming up with a new development that again you have to get off Bell Avenue. You either got to go on Cornell or you got to go on North Midaw.
Right, and so when we do our traffic studies, we do incorporate background growth, traffic from other developments and ambient traffic growth in the area. So that is accounted for within what we call a no-build condition. No build is this site not being built, but everything else around in the growth incorporated.
So you think that was included, the traffic that was going to be showing up with the other new development?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else have any questions on the testimony just given?
Harold Willett, 44 North Bedore Street. I'm back. My question is reference to cars coming out, two cars coming out of both driveways onto Bell Avenue at the same time. And you have parking on Bell Avenue. My question is, how are you going to rectify this? You have parking on both sides on Bell Avenue. You have the delivery of these big trucks, Amazon, and other trucks like that making delivery. And you have these trucks, these cars coming out of Bell Avenue, out of your project, your monstrosity that you want to build, coming out onto Bell Avenue. Both coming out at the same time, onto Bell Avenue.
Right, so those two driveways, those are spaced over 200 feet apart from each other. So that, that helps disperse the traffic physically. So if there is a vehicle coming out of one and the other at the same time, they're well apart from each other. And then, as it relates to the traffic and the parked vehicles on the site, I mean, the driveways, meet those engineering requirements for driveway width, for those turning maneuvers, for, the vehicles coming on and off the site. It's been, designed in accordance with industry standards and the residential site improvement standards from the state.
Okay, what years was those standards made?
The most recent update to the RSIS, I think, was...
Mike could probably tell you.
Yeah, I'm gonna say it's in the last 5 years.
Well, guess what, sir? There's been a lot of stuff going on within the last 5 years.
Understood.
So the thing is, I would like to say that I think that you might want to, my question is, what are you going to do about the congestion of the traffic on Bell Avenue? And you're proposing cars coming out of your proposed project, onto Bell Avenue, two cars or one after another, more than one at a time coming on Bell Avenue, and all the traffic that is on Bell Avenue. There's a lot of traffic on Bell Avenue, sir.
Yeah, and I think that remedying the Bell Avenue traffic, short of literally closing it down on one end or the other to prevent those cut-throughs, there's really not much that can be done to deter those movements. For our site that we're proposing here, a multifamily townhouse residential use, that traffic increase on Bell is not going to have a significant adverse impact to Bell or the surrounding roadway network.
My next question is, may I, the parking on the left side, the parallel parking?
Yep.
You have parallel parking. People are going to be crossing from there. Is there doors in the back of those buildings for them to get in? Or they go walk around the building? How does that work?
So if we could put on the screen again. So we're talking about the parallel parking spaces on the west side here. And then my understanding is that there are entrances for Building A along this west side here, so they would be able to access that area relatively immediately. And the other side is just the driveways, garages.
Okay, now, we have my question is, when you have big trucks coming down, delivery trucks coming down that street, and that parallel parking, and you have people egressing from those cars, is that going to be a safe means of egress for those motor vehicle drivers and passengers?
Yeah, the delivery vehicles coming to the site can stage on the site within those aisles and avoid conflicts with the vehicles that are circulating the site. There's room to do so.
What about for fire trucks and stuff like that?
Yeah, we've prepared those truck turning exhibits, submitted to the fire department for review, and of course we have to meet all their requirements. But yes, the site's designed to accommodate them.
I'm not happy with this because I know that we have had a couple of
that's
deaths.
testimony now, Mr.
I'm just saying, I
There'll
just
be a
like to
time
make it
for
for the
that.
record that we had a couple of deaths in town. And the lady just said that she almost got ran over, and I know that people get this. I know you said you did this study or have this study, but I just think that study is not really up to date. And my concern is that you need to get an up-to-date study. That's my comment.
Anyone else have any questions on, come on up.
I'm Steve Johnson, 97 West End Avenue. I have a question for the traffic engineer. Have you studied the traffic going from North Midaw to West End Avenue?
Yes, that was one of the study locations.
And did you visit that area on the weekend?
I believe we did weekend counts as well, yes.
The reason I'm asking is because there's a lot of traffic, and I can't tell you how many times I've seen accidents just with the conditions now. If you're talking about adding 93 parking spots, and even if there's 60 cars, that's a lot of traffic. And that area is very congested, and I think it's very dangerous. And I'm just not happy with it.
I think that, when we look at residential projects, and I've worked on hundreds of residential projects, the parking allocation, the amount of parking spaces and the number of vehicles is not equivalent to the amount of cars that are going in and out of the site over the course of that peak hour, that peak period, because these uses, they spread out their impacts really throughout the day. It's a much lower traffic generation than you may typically think, but I understand the point. It's well taken.
Going home from work, I arrive at the train station at about 5:30, and there's a lot of traffic that's already heading down Somerset Street, headed toward Route 28, and it gets very backed up, and I'm just afraid that this is just going to make it even more congested. And now they're going to start adding traffic lights at West End and Meadow Street at both ends when it goes out to Somerset Street. I just wondered if you'd taken into consideration any of that.
Yeah, typically anytime we're converting a stop-controlled intersection to one with the traffic signal. There's immense improvement in the operations. You know, but we did study at Middo and West End, and it's, you know, the changes in level of service are
Now,
minuscule.
how about garbage trucks? How are they getting, is there enough room to navigate a garbage truck?
Yes.
To get it into the back corner where you're saying?
Yes,
the
there's
garbage-
enough room for a refuse vehicle to circulate the site.
Okay, and once he gets into the site, if he can, because Bell Avenue is so congested, there's a minimum amount of space in there, and I find it hard to believe he's gonna be able to make a turn to get in there.
Yeah, we've accommodated, you know, the requisite space for a garbage truck to come on and off the site.
Okay. All right, that's enough for now. You said we'll have an opportunity to have general questions at the end?
We will.
Okay.
The way it's going, Mr. Johnson, it may not be tonight. It may be as a carryover, depending on how far we get tonight. Yeah, we got architect, yeah. There will be a carryover. Yes, anyone else? Okay.
Yes. Again, my name's Caroline Braheny. I live on Cornell Boulevard. And this might just be that I don't understand what you were talking about, but you said it would add a second to the traffic. What does that mean, and who does that second belong to?
Sure. So what we study is it's a metric called level of service, which is really just average delay experienced per vehicle by all the vehicles that are on the roadway over the course of the busiest hour.
Okay.
So when the increase of 1 second is an average increase of 1 second per vehicle over the course of that hour.
Okay, and that increase is, excuse me, it's not from the site because you didn't study Bell Avenue, it's from the getting to the light at 206? Is
Yes,
it getting to the corner of Cornell and West End? Where is that 1 second being delayed?
All right, so there's different movements and different intersections that were studied. The two main study locations are at Bell Ave and Route 206,
Okay.
and then at Middo and West End.
Okay, and did you take into account the shortness of the traffic light at Bell Avenue and 206 when you have traffic coming out that way, wanting to cross over 206 or get to the circle? That light is very short when you're on Bell Avenue. So how does the shortness of that light impact, perhaps the traffic backing up onto Bell Avenue on the Raritan side?
That's a great question. So when we do the analysis, it's a pretty detailed set of criteria, but one of the components is the actual timing that is built into the traffic signal at that intersection. And so you can actually request the timing directive, if you will, that the DOT implements at an intersection, and DOT controls that intersection. That's why they give almost all the time to Route 206, right? It's one of their main thoroughfares. And so, yes, the analysis incorporates the fact that Bell Avenue does not get a lot of time over the course of a cycle. And those pieces are incorporated as such, right? If we gave equal time to both, you would have backups on 206 for miles.
Right, okay. And when you did this analysis on the corner of Cornell or Middaw and West End Avenue, at what time of day was that done to determine it was less than a second?
So there was a peak morning period from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. and the peak evening period from 4 p.m. to 7 p.m. And then within those periods, we isolate a peak hour, the busiest hour within those periods to actually conduct the study with.
And what day of the week?
It's on a typical weekday. Let me make sure I have this. This was on Tuesday in May.
Tuesday in May. Okay, thank you very much.
Anyone else? Good, okay. Mr. Ogrodnik, it's on you.
Okay.
So at this time, we're going to introduce our planner, Spatch Trahan from Phillips Priest. We anticipate getting through the bulk of the planning testimony, but we may bring back Paul Grigel, another planner from Phillips Priest, just at the end.
Would you stand and raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give in this matter will be the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Please state your name and spell your last name.
Spatch is my first name, Tran is my last name, that's Trahan.
Thank you very much. Mr. Grodnick, your witness, sir.
Ms. Trahan, could you provide the board with your education and professional experience?
Sure. I'm my associate principal at Phillips Price, Greigel, Laney Hughes. We're a planning firm based in Hoboken, New Jersey. I have my Master of City and Regional Planning from the Blaustein School at Rutgers University. And I've been licensed as a professional planner both nationally with the American Institute of Certified Planners and also as a New Jersey professional planner since 2019. And I've appeared before other municipalities as a planning expert in Branchburg, also Princeton, Woodbridge, and a variety of others.
Oh, thank you.
Would you accept? Okay, thank you. Could you go over first some of the variance relief that we're requesting in this application, as well as the bulk standards and the waivers?
Sure. So as was mentioned in the beginning of this application, there's a use variance. That's because the townhouse development is not a permitted use in the zone. This is the R2 single-family residence zone. The uses that are permitted here are single-family residential, as well as community residences or shelters, nonprofit parks, and municipal and public safety buildings and uses. And there are some conditional uses permitted in this zone, such as boarding houses, schools, houses of worship, and antennas. So none of those uses are townhouse or multifamily uses, and that's why we're here tonight with a use variance request. There's also a request for a floor area ratio variance. 30% is the permitted floor area ratio. The existing floor area ratio today is 35.3%, and the proposed FAR, that's the shorthand for it, is 69.3%. That will require what's called a D4 variance. So the use variance is a D1, the FAR variance is a D4. The maximum building height is exceeded. The height is permitted up to 35 feet or 2.5 stories, and the proposal is 40 feet and 3 stories. This is a D6 variance. So again, there are 3 D variances, and in terms of C variances, there's a variance for impervious coverage or improved coverage. 40% of the land area is permitted to be improved coverage, whereas today 60.9% of the land is improved, and the proposal is for 65.5% to be impervious. There's also a variance request for the location of parking within a front yard. The ordinance requires that parking only be provided in side and rear yards, and this is in the front yard. There are just 4 spaces with that condition. There are also a couple of waivers for shade trees. There's a minimum requirement of 1 shade tree for every 5 parking spaces. In this case, 4 would be required and 3 are proposed. And this is in the parking areas. And the minimum illumination, 0.6 foot candles is required, whereas at the driveway entrances, the lighting is a little bit less than 0.2 foot candles. So those are the variances that we're requesting tonight. In going through the application, I just wanted to provide a little bit of context before I get into the exact proofs for these. And I will go over what the proofs the board is required to find, and then the evidence on the record for that. So, as was mentioned at the beginning of the application, this property has been developed for approximately 125 years with an industrial use. Previously, it had uses that contaminated the site that have been now substantially remediated. There were some longtime users of the site, but within the past 5 or so years, there were efforts to reoccupy the site. And as was already mentioned, that's only relevant in the sense that the building is structurally sound. It could be reoccupied again for light industrial use. But today, the intent is to provide a townhouse development in a residential, mixed residential neighborhood. And I'll explain why I believe that. And I think that this is really a much better planning alternative, especially for this size of a site, with this site history and its location within the town and some other factors. This area, yes, it's within the R2 single-family residence district, but it is not solely restricted to residential uses. Obviously, there's the site that's been industrial for an incredibly long time. There are also some auto uses in the vicinity. There's some institutional uses. And so it is not a purely, residential single-family fabric of this neighborhood. There is some precedent to see some other types of uses in this part of town. In terms of the variance proofs, first I'll address the D1 use variance, the fact that the townhouse is not permitted in this zone. So a board is required to find that this can be granted for, in particular cases, for special reasons. That's the kind of legal language. But what that means is that the board has to find that either the property or the use that is being proposed is either inherently beneficial, I'm not arguing that tonight, or find that the site is particularly suited for this use, that is the case that I will argue tonight, or that there is a hardship that prevents the site from being developed with the permitted use. I think that the particular suitability line of thinking is the right one in this context. There's also the requirement that you follow what's called the Medici criteria, and that's just a court case that requires you to reconcile the fact that there is a use being proposed that is not permitted in the zoning ordinance or the policy document of the master plan. And the negative criteria also has to be addressed that the proposed use can be granted without substantial detriment to the public good and without impairing the zoning ordinance or the master plan of the municipality. So in this scenario, I think that the use can be granted, the use variance can be granted because of the current and historic use of the property and the way it was developed, the fact that this is a very large site for the area and its kind of location within the context of town, and also the land use context in the vicinity, and also how this property fits into the neighborhood, its design. So as I mentioned, this was a long non-conforming use. It was pre-existing non-conforming. That means that it was built prior to zoning being established for this area, and it continued and was permitted to continue for many, many years. But this is not, the way that the property was developed was not compatible with the residential neighborhood. The residences surrounding it had to deal for many years with truck traffic, employee traffic, the fact that they just lived next to an industrial use that had contaminants on the site. So this was not a compatible use for this property. Instead, the townhouse use is a much better use of this very large site. And that's the other thing, is that this is an oversized lot for the R2 district. It's over 116,000 square feet in size. That's nearly 20 times the minimum lot area that's required for the R2 zone. It has extensive frontage on Bell Avenue, 388 feet. That's nearly 8 times the minimum required for a typical single-family residence. The depth of the property is also, it's quite deep, and so it's not that you have a long stretch that, single-family residences could be developed all along the stretch. There's still the large area of the rear of the property that's adjacent to railroad tracks. And that's also area that could be well utilized and without impacting any neighbors because it's adjacent to these railroad tracks. This also, as I mentioned, the surrounding area does have a bit of a mixed use context. There are some auto-oriented businesses, houses of worship. It's not just single-family residences, and obviously the former industrial use of the property. But we believe that this townhouse development is a much better use of the property. It's particularly suited to this site because of its size. In terms of the municipal land use law, one thing that your attorney was mentioning in the beginning is that you can find that purposes of the municipal land use law are advanced. And these purposes are listed out in the municipal land use law, A, B, C, D, all the way to the end. I think that a few are relevant to this application. The first is Purpose A, which is to encourage municipal action to guide the appropriate use or development of all land in the state in a manner which promotes the public health, safety, morals, and general welfare. Again, this site will be a much better use. It will no longer have contaminants on the site, be fully remediated for residential use, which is a higher level of remediation. This site is also in the state's metropolitan planning area, in the state plan, which is intended to accommodate growth in the state. The site is oversized, as I mentioned, and I think that providing different housing options for people in the town at different price points and configurations will help to diversify the housing stock here in Somerville. Purpose G is to provide sufficient space and appropriate locations for a variety of uses. Again, this type of residential use is good for different household sizes and their different needs and different incomes. And Purpose I is to promote a desirable visual environment. This site would be redeveloped with significant aesthetic benefits to the neighborhood. Townhouse development is one of the most traditional looking and low impact type of multifamily development that can be built. This has a very minimal design characteristic where you have the buildings, 3 of the buildings closest to Bell Avenue are perpendicular to the street so that they don't give off such a large appearance. The mass of the building is going more horizontal, and so that people don't see it when they're driving by. I think that it's a much better development scenario than a lot of things that could go at this site, and it really is an improvement to the site. In terms of the negative criteria, talking about if there is any substantial detriments to the public good that would result from this use, I don't believe that there would be any substantial detriments. Again, this is a unique site in this neighborhood. This would be improving the conditions. As the traffic engineer discussed, the traffic can be accommodated, the traffic that would be generated from the residents of this site. As the civil engineer mentioned and testified to, stormwater management would be dealt with. Currently, the site doesn't meet any modern stormwater management requirements. This is considered a major development, and I don't think it was fully explained, but within the last several years, the state has required much more stringent stormwater regulations for major developments, significantly more so than it would have been 10 years ago or even less. And this project meets those requirements, and that is significant. And the engineer even mentioned that it would reduce the peak flow of runoff compared to today. So there's also landscaping and buffering that's being utilized, both the buffer of the detention basin, buffering the properties to the west, also solid privacy fencing along the eastern property line, which I know is a concern of the board, and various landscaping elements all around the property, trying to maintain the trees, the sycamore trees along Bell Avenue to the extent possible, and 4 are to be retained as indicated on the plans. Parking is accommodated on the site, compliant parking. That's part of the benefit of this property being so large, is that it can accommodate full parking for all of these residences and their visitors. And in terms of visual impacts, again, I think that this is the way that the property is designed, and the fact that these are townhouses is really minimizing any visual impacts to the neighborhood. You know, they have peaked roofs, just like other buildings in the neighborhood. It's not a flat-roofed, bulky, boxy, modern type building. It really fits much nicer into the neighborhood because it is designed the way that it is, and it's a townhouse use. In terms of the zoning plan and the zoning ordinance, if there would be any substantial impairment of these documents, again, for the reasons I discussed, I think that the relief is warranted, the variance relief. This is bringing the use of the property closer to compliance with the zone, because we are now replacing a non-residential industrial building with a residential building. It is not a single-family use, but it is a residential use, so it is now bringing it into more conformity with the intent of this zone. It's, again, more consistent with the land use mix in this area. And in terms of your 2019 master plan, there was a goal related to housing, and it stated, provide a range of housing types to meet varied resident populations' needs, as well as to preserve established residential areas and promote redevelopment by establishing redevelopment areas. This proposal is consistent with this goal. It is increasing opportunities for households to buy a different kind of housing stock at different price points, or to occupy them. This is also located in the priority growth investment area of Somerset County's planning investment framework. It's an area with infrastructure in place, a mix of uses. There are services and transportation assets within the area that the residents can access. So it's not that this property is on the edge of town. It's very accessible to the various aspects of town that a resident of a townhouse development would find appropriate and want to access. In terms of the Medici reconciliation proof, again, this unique circumstance with a longstanding non-residential property that's very large in size, it is appropriate to redevelop it with the residential use in this particular context, and so I think it can be reconciled. And I think that it is appropriate to consider that an alternate use for this property may not be as suitable in this location, but this is definitely a suitable site for townhouse development. In terms of the floor area ratio and building height variances, again, those are D4 and D6 variances, so they require a higher and different standard of proof than a C variance. As defined in the municipal land use law, the standard of proof is less than for a use variance. The issue is really related to showing that the use in the property can accommodate the greater amount of floor area ratio and the greater height than is permitted by the ordinance, that the property can accommodate some of the problems that are typically associated with those things. So in this case, there are a few overlapping issues with these two variances. And in my opinion, the site can accommodate the FAR and the height that's greater than permitted. This relates in large part due to the use variance request. The housing proposed does require a larger building area, and the FAR requirement really relates to single-family residences. And so it doesn't contemplate a townhouse development on a site of this size. And so it is reasonable to exceed the FAR requirement because this is just a different type of development that's being contemplated. It wouldn't be rational to apply a single-family home standard to a townhouse development. In terms of the height, again, that standard is intended for a single-family dwelling. The height of this townhouse development is 3 stories and 40 feet. It's very reasonable, especially considering that it can accommodate a garage parking space on the ground level. If you were to keep it at 2.5 stories and lower the height to 35 feet, you would significantly reduce the living area. And townhouses typically go to about 3 stories because they need to accommodate parking on the ground floor. So again, because this is a different kind of development, these standards don't necessarily apply. And the site is very large. The height is not particularly noticeable like it would be on a small single-family lot. It's set back from Bell Avenue. There are buffers and landscaping applied to minimize the impression of mass of the building, and that applies for FAR and the height. In terms of the C variances, there are 2 types of C variances, which I'm sure you're very well aware of. There's the C1 variance, which is where you demonstrate that the variance is needed because there's a hardship related to the physical property. The C2 variance is sometimes called the flexible C variance, and that states that the benefits of granting the variance outweigh the detriments, and it advances purposes of the municipal land use law. So these C variances, I think, should be subsumed within the granting of the D variance, but to consider them on their own, I think they also can meet the criteria of the C2 C variance. So in terms of the maximum improvement coverage, again, 40% is permitted. Today, the property is improved with 60.9% impervious area. The proposal is 65.5% impervious area. So it's a slight increase in impervious area, but as you heard from the civil engineer, the state regulations related to stormwater are being met, and that is significant. Stormwater would be channelized into an appropriate area to be dealt with. So the increase in impervious area is being accommodated, and again, because of the large site, it can handle this while still providing significant amount of landscaping and open space area for residents to, for visual impact to be lessened. In terms of the parking area location, 4 parking spaces are provided in the front yard, and that's restricted. They are only permitted to be in the side or the rear yard. But this is a very small part of the overall site design. Providing these 4 spaces allows the project to fully comply with its parking requirement, and there's landscaping to buffer the visual impact of these surface parking spaces in the front yard. So I don't believe that there are any detriments, significant detriments for these C variances. And in terms of promoting or advancing purposes of the municipal land use law, again, I think purpose A is advanced, which is to promote the public health, safety, morals, and general welfare through appropriate development. Again, this is a longstanding industrial property, and I think that it will be appropriately redeveloped with a residential use, including all of the site improvements and the need for those C variances. An additional purpose of the municipal land use law is C, provide sufficient light, air, and open space. I do think that the separation between the 5 buildings and the distance to the surrounding the perimeter property lines does allow for significant light and air to be on the property so that it doesn't appear to be such a massive or bulking development. And there is greenery and landscaping to provide some passive open space on the property. And there was discussed the idea that the designers could work with the board professionals on potentially additional open space. In terms of the negative criteria, I don't believe that these C variances would have a substantial detriment to the public good, nor substantially impair the intent or purpose of the master plan or zoning ordinance. These variances are really subsumed within the granting of the use variance because they are all part and parcel of the same development. But the property can accommodate all of these variances. And I don't think that any of the deviations are substantial in the context of the history of the site, in the context of the size of the property and its location within town, and also the surrounding land use context. So overall, I think that this is a significantly improved proposal for the property, and the variances can be granted. And just lastly, I'll touch on the design waivers. The standard for design waivers is that they cannot be practically met. Those standards cannot be met. And the shade trees in the parking areas, that was tried to be maximized. Couldn't provide the one extra shade tree, but because it was impracticable with the providing sufficient parking on the site. And in terms of the illumination, where it doesn't meet the minimum illumination amount at the driveway entrance, that's just related to minimizing glare and light spillover outside of the property line, and it's just at one small part of the property. So I think that it's impracticable to comply with those standards, and they shouldn't be a problem, those waivers. Any questions?
Any questions of the testimony just given by Mr. Trahan?
Yeah, just a few, as usual. The east side two buildings, they appear to be quite close to the rear yards of the buildings of Biddle Street. In fact, they kind of look like they tower over them a little bit. From a planning perspective, is that really a good idea?
So the side yard, there's no side yard setback variance that's being requested. It does meet that requirement. I think that the question is, does the height or mass of the building therefore then impact on those neighboring properties? So again, this proposal is for a 3-story townhouse building. 2.5 stories is permitted in the zone, and there's a slight difference in the number of feet, 35 feet to 40 feet.
I climb ladders, I'm aware of that.
Yes.
I'm not talking about the height so much as the proximity to the rear yards of those buildings on Middle Street.
Right. Well, the point that I wanted to make was if this property were developed with single-family residences, a single-family residence could be proposed fairly close to that property line with only a slight differential in height. And I think that the fact that those are the two smallest buildings is important to consider. That was intentional, that the two smallest buildings be located right there on the east side. And it varies. The setback there varies, as was mentioned. It goes from 20 feet to 8 feet, but 20 feet is a typical, or it may be a typical rear yard setback, maybe 20 to 25 feet. So for some of these buildings, the setback is what you would normally expect for a single-family building. Now, obviously, it's townhouses, but I think that the other improving factors are that there is a 6-foot privacy fence that's being proposed along that eastern property line, so that you wouldn't have, people walking out their door and looking into the neighbor's property. There's also landscaping that's being proposed all around the property, and I think that as it grows in and the foliage intensifies over time, that helps to provide a visual screening so that those properties aren't impacted. And I think that the fact that those townhomes, they don't exactly have usable space right there along the eastern property line. I don't think anybody's going to be holding a barbecue and creating noise that would bother the neighbors in that particular location. There's just not really the space for it. So I think that it's really the design of the property allows it to minimize any potential for impacts on those eastern neighbors.
You went exactly where I was going. The usable space now we're back to recreation space. Where do people go? Where do they sit outside? What do they do here? It looks to me like the intensity of the use, I got no problem with the use. I'm just questioning if the intensity is appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, with a townhouse development, by its nature, it has different characteristics, and there are different types of households that it will attract. And somebody who is attracted to living in one of those buildings in D or E may not be particularly interested in a lot of outdoor space. Diversifying the housing stock overall is something that we see throughout the state, that you know, not every household aspires to a single-family home, or they afford it, and people, you know, that choose to live here are understanding what accommodations are coming along with it.
Yeah, I would agree. But where I'm going, again, I'm back to my pedestrian internal movements in the building, around the buildings. It appears to me that if you get a little kid on one of those plastic tricycles riding around, he'll be a part of an Amazon truck. It just seems that it's a whole lot going on. Admittedly a large space for Somerville, but there's a whole lot going on there, and I'm just wondering if that's appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, I understand your concern. As someone with children, I think a lot of people these days continue to supervise their children while they're outside, especially in a multifamily development like this. I'm not sure that it's unusual for this type of development, that there's some level of supervision for children that are roaming around, especially if they're of younger ages. Older children would be more aware of traffic patterns. And also, I think the traffic engineer testified that the amount of traffic that's coming in and out is relatively little. And because they're turning corners very soon, they're going into their own driveways, they're not going at, I wouldn't expect that they would be going at high speeds, and they would be looking out for their neighbors.
Everybody should.
Everybody should.
But I'm back to the Amazon guy. And I'm not picking on Amazon, but these trucks are coming in, and we've got people wandering around in basically an area without sidewalks. So when you get right down to a 3-foot sidewalk, if I'm hobbling along and Mr. Willard's coming the other direction, somebody's in the street. I mean, that's just the reality of it. And I'm just getting back to the intensity issue. If you're a planner, what do you think?
I think that there are different types of housing that can accommodate different families with different needs. There may be households that want to live in D and E that don't have any children. They may have children, and they'll have to supervise them appropriately. And I think that that's what they understand when they move in.
From a theoretical standpoint, yeah, but everybody supervises their kids while they're looking at their phones. I mean, and I'm just concerned that if you get a couple of kids, there's really no place for them to be here outside of in the road. Now, years ago, we all played in the road, but today it's inappropriate. And I'm just concerned about whether it's appropriate to have a place potentially with, and you've got 3-bedroom houses here, you're gonna have some kids, or you have grandma living there, something's going on. You know, and there's no real place to be. You know, you're in the street.
Point taken. I think, I'm not sure if this will be agreed to at the end of the day, but initially the civil engineer did mention there was the possibility of providing some fenced-in play area at the north end of the site. Again, fully fenced, if it were to be agreed to, because with any play area, you would want to make sure that kids are not going to stray outside of that area if they're playing.
But they have to get there.
True.
Yeah.
Yep.
Any other questions from the board on the testimony just given by Ms. Trahan?
Just one. You know, I definitely would say that D and E are definitely townhouses, but it looks like A, B, and C are more condo than townhouses. I know we've said townhouse development, but it seems more like the smaller buildings are definitely townhouses, single units straight up and down, but the other units are over and unders. So when you say townhouse, it's also more like a townhouse condo.
Ms. Trahan, could you explain for the edification for the audience and the 12 people who are watching us on YouTube? Hey, we get 15, we were entitled to an Emmy. the difference between a townhouse and a condominium?
Well, a townhouse can be a condominium or a rental, but a townhouse typically is characterized by having a vertical party wall and having a typical design configuration. Now, you're right that there is one unit, a lower unit, and an upper unit. I don't think it takes away from the fact that each section of the building has a shared vertical wall, and that it appears to be in sections. We didn't have an architect discussing tonight, so I'm going off of the, obviously, the submitted plans. But I think that that would be a question that you could ask the architect as well, the difference between a multifamily and a townhouse. But I think the fact that these are in rows, defined rows, with only, less than 10 wide in terms of the vertical sections of the building, indicates that they're townhouse style development at the least. In any case, I think that even if you were to call it a multifamily building, it does have the look and feel of a townhouse. So even if the interior is spliced a little bit differently, it has the look and feel of a townhouse development.
When I see townhouses, that's more single family to me, as that's how I understand it. And as you move across that parking lot, you get to a more high volume, high density living area. So definitely those smaller buildings are definitely townhouse. I would say those are townhouses, but the other ones, just as more like a condominium, just so that the public knows that, as you move across that lot, those buildings do have a higher volume of people living in them.
Yeah, and I think that, just for the record, the proofs that I put on, and anytime I said townhouse, I think it applies if you say multifamily, because we're talking about the design as you see it before you.
I would definitely agree with you that this is a better use for this property. I think the intensity is a little much. I think what most of the neighbors are probably shaking their heads about is, there's a lot of stuff being put on this property. And are we putting too much stuff on this property? And to me, some of the planning, you always talk about also having green spaces. Obviously, if you ask people what they want to do with this area, they say, I want a park. Well, that's not going to happen. We can't put a park there because it's obviously someone owns the property. They need to, make some kind of money off this property. But putting all these places on, there is an opportunity here to have green space for the people that live there. We have more parking lot than we have grass. I know we're over in the FAR, and there's an awful lot of things we could do to this property to make it less intensive to the neighborhood. Also, bringing people who live there spaces to have recreation areas. Giving them a backyard or a front yard. We're missing sidewalks. It's you're coming out of the front door on the west side, and you're in the driveway. I get this isn't Hoboken. We're not piling on each other. This is still Somerville. We still have side yards, front yards, backyards. In this neighborhood, they do have front yards, backyards, and side yards. This project, it's missing some things. I think the intensity of it is a little much.
So I think that a couple things. Obviously, there's always a balance in designing a project. This project, has compliant parking, and that's a sticking point for any type of multi-unit development that comes before almost any board in New Jersey. So it was very important to provide compliant parking. And that's why you see the amount of surface lot area and drive areas that you do see. In terms of the number of units, there are 38 units being proposed. If you think about overall in Somerville, 38 townhouse units, it's an important addition to diversifying Somerville's housing stock and allowing for people, whether it's younger people or older people that are looking to downsize, a way to enter the housing market and find quality, good housing that meets their needs at their price point. So I think that providing those additional 38 units to Somerville will be a benefit, and it'll be very attractive to people who are looking for that type of missing middle is what we call it, missing middle housing. That it's not as high of a barrier to entry as buying a detached single-family property, but it's also not small unit, low-end rental housing.
You haven't seen Somerville lately, have you? Townhouses, we have become the apartment and townhouse capital of Central Jersey.
And there's a big housing demand. I think that the whole state is grappling with where to put new housing. There's demand all over the state, and so the demand is not letting up. And I think that for this size of site, it's a very appropriate use for this property. Again, it's adjacent to railroad tracks. There are some neighbors that are adjacent to it. There are rear yards abut it. There's the buffer of Bell Avenue itself for the people across the street. And again, the orientation of the buildings is not, you're not seeing one long building mass along the frontage of the street. They're perpendicular intentionally, those ones along Bell Avenue, so that it doesn't have that visual impact. And in terms of just the intensity, the number of units, again, the demand for housing and this missing middle kind of housing, this is a sweet spot for a lot of people who are either buying their, or getting into their, wanting to move out of their parents' house, getting their own place, becoming more independent, having young families, or older folks who are downsizing. So I think it's an important housing option to provide for the whole region too.
You may not know this, but what's the price point on these units?
I don't think that that's available information to me or for the public record.
Because I know that across the street, when we first started working on those about 20 years ago, they said, pre-construction is going to be between $200 and $250. Those babies are going for $700,000 now.
He's referring to the townhouses across the street here.
We call it Robeson Street, Mr. Robeson. We call it Robeson after Paul Robeson. That's how his family pronounces it. It's tough. It's we do have a lot of townhouses being under construction or have been recently built or on the drawing board. So we are meeting that need.
So there was a conversation about a potential play area on Bell Avenue, 700 square feet or something like that. In your opinion, is that sufficient? Is that a big enough space for the number of units in this application?
I think that any sort of outdoor play area would definitely be a benefit to the residents. There's obviously other public amenities and recreational facilities that anybody in town can access, but as far as having something on site, I think that it's a good amount of space to have if it were to be agreed upon and designed appropriately.
And so you were talking earlier about open space and the benefits of open space. Those calculations are you defining the parking spaces as part of that open space and the streets as part of that open space?
So I think what I mentioned was Purpose C of the Municipal Land Use Law, which specifically mentions light, air, and open space. It mentions all three. In terms of light and air, and my point was that there is separation between all of these buildings so that you don't have one big hulking mass of a development. And as far as open space, the point that I wanted to make was that there's significant amount of landscaping that's being proposed. So again, it may not be active space that you see, right.
And have a picnic,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I was just curious because to assume that that parking and streets are part of this open space. I could understand the light and the air, but I just want to make a point that I don't see parking spaces or streets as open space.
No, that's fair. I wouldn't consider surface parking areas to be open space either.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else on the board have any questions of the testimony just given? Anyone from the audience have any questions of the testimony given by Ms. Trahan? I am pronouncing that right, am I?
Tran, yes.
Tran, okay. Now, these are questions. not
Yes, Jim
just-
Von Schilling, 42 North Middle Street. Just to clarify, you mentioned, you're characterizing the neighborhood and you mentioned houses of worship. I'm thinking, the only thing that I know is there's a small brick church across the street, the size of a house, no property, it's got a driveway, no parking lot. And that's one house of worship. And now you said houses, so is there another that I'm not aware of?
I think I was thinking of that same one.
Okay.
But I think the idea, and that is permitted in the
No, I understand.
area.
Okay,
yes.
but I think it's not like a big church with the big grounds and parking lots. It's a tiny little. Okay, and then you mentioned automotive industry or something about automotive, and I had to rack my brains. I think you're talking about AutoZone on the other side of 206, and then
Gavazzi.
Mr. Tire, and
Thul's.
but they're not really in.
Gas station, I believe.
Right, but they're not really in the neighborhood we're talking about.
They may be a couple blocks away.
Okay.
But I think that the fact that there are multiple within the
Yeah, but
a
I
vicinity is a half-mile vicinity.
just
I
want to
think is
clarify that
important.
in
Yes.
the streets that we're talking about, those are not. We don't have any auto in the streets of the people that are here.
Right on
Okay.
on the specific block.
Or several blocks. It's not. It's
Okay.
not okay.
But it's also in a different municipality.
Yeah, that's true
Mm-hmm.
too. Okay.
Anyone else have any questions of the testimony just given?
Rob Bay at 43 North Meadow Street. I want to talk about what Mr. O'Neill was talking about with the
This is in the form of a question?
Yes, sir. Yes,
Okay.
sir. Would you agree that if you give a variance to move the building closer and you give a variance to make the building higher, would you agree that that would make it look like it's more on top of you?
Well, there is no variance for the setback from the property line.
Isn't there
clear.
a variance on the east end
No.
for that corner where the yard is only 8 feet wide?
No.
Okay. Would you agree that it's gonna look like it's on top of you if it's only 20 feet away from you?
Again, it's a corner of the building, and it gradually does go further away. I do understand the point that it will, to some people's estimation, seem maybe too close. But I think that the mitigating factors here are the privacy fence, and the landscaping that's being provided, and the fact that it's only the corner of the building. And if you were to have a single-family home that went to 2.5 stories and 35 feet, it would be perfectly permitted within that same distance, and that could be along the whole frontage of the building, of the dwelling, not just one corner.
I'm talking about the 2 units with what, 4 families?
D&E.
Yes,
On the
building
eastern
D.
end.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Because that butts up to my backyard. There's a property right in front. And for you to get a variance on the height, I think is a problem. And I wish you could do something about that. Thank you.
I do think that the roof line does help to mitigate some of the appearance of height. And again, if you were to have a single-family building with this 8-foot setback, it would be permitted to go up 2.5 feet and 2.5 stories and 35 feet. And we would not be requesting any sort of variance for that situation. So it's really not, I don't consider it to be significantly different than that situation. And again, it's a corner of the building is within that, is 8 feet away, a permitted setback distance,
Side yard setback,
side yard setback.
8 and 12. Anyone else have any questions? Okay. Hearing none, it's 10 o'clock. And we know where our board is. We're not accepting any new testimony. So we're gonna have to carry this over to our next meeting, Mr. O'Grodny.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And we
Couple of things. I actually have the Granite's application coming up at the next meeting, 205 Cheris.
He wants to bump that one?
What's that?
Wants to bump that
Well, I'm not sure it's going to proceed. And we'll talk about that when we get there. But we'd ask to be carried to that
Yes, and we will-
hearing. And the other thing is, I think we are listening intently on some of the comments, and we're certainly going to look at some changes that would address all the concerns related to what was raised here tonight. So we would ask that it be carried without notice.
Without notice,
To the 16th, I think it is. 18th? What is it? All right. Yeah, I'll be there anyway, and if we can't get to,
19.
so we very well may be able to continue, right through for that
For-
application.
For those in the audience, we will continue this until our next meeting, the 19th of February. There will be no notice given by the applicant. It's not necessary. 7 p.m. in this location. Robeson. That's how they pronounce it. Hmm? Any other business to come before the board?
Nope.
Nope. Someone would like to move for adjournment?
Move for adjournment.
Move second, all in favor? Opposed? It's carried.
Thank you very much.